Some places do not wish to be measured. The Chiricahua Mountains rise from the high desert of southeastern Arizona like the spine of something ancient and half-buried. The Apache called this land the land of standing-up rocks, and for thousands of years they moved through its labyrinthine canyons with a reverence that bordered on wariness. The hoodoos, towering columns of volcanic rhyolite sculpted by 27 million years of wind and rain, stand in formations so precise they appear designed. Balanced rocks the size of small houses perch on pedestals no wider than a dinner plate. Stone spires lean at angles that defy what the eye expects from gravity. The monument itself covers nearly 12,000 acres of this terrain, established in 1924 after a Swedish immigrant named Neil Eriksson and his wife Emma homesteaded the land and eventually convinced the federal government of its value. But long before Eriksson, long before the cavalry and the Apache Wars, the Chiricahua Apache avoided certain sections of these mountains after dark. Their oral traditions speak of places where the land forgets itself, where distances shift and travelers find themselves arriving before they departed, or not arriving at all. Masai Point sits at an elevation of 6,870 feet, offering panoramic views of the Sulphur Springs Valley and the Hoodoo formations below. It is named for a Chiricahua Apache warrior who escaped captivity and vanished into these mountains in 1886. His body was never found. The point is accessible by a paved road, and on most days, tourists gather there to photograph the impossible geology. But in the spring of 1987, a team of 4 surveyors arrived with different intentions. They had come to measure everything. Iacicius. The United States Geological Survey dispatched the team as part of a broader initiative to update topographical maps across the Southwest. Team leader Harold Okonkwo, a senior cartographer with 19 years of experience, had requested the Chiricahua assignment specifically. He had worked volcanic terrain before, in Hawaii, in the Cascades, and considered himself immune to the disorientation that sometimes affected surveyors in unfamiliar landscapes. With him were 3 colleagues: Rebecca Stilwell, a geodetic technician from the Denver field office; Marcus Trujillo, a recent hire with a background in photogrammetry; and David Lindquist, who operated the electronic distance measurement equipment. They arrived on March 9, 1987, and established their base camp at the Bonita Canyon Campground. The work proceeded normally for the first several days. They triangulated positions, recorded elevations, and cross-referenced their readings with aerial photography from a 1983 flyover. By March 15th, they had completed the western quadrant of their assigned grid and begun work on the formations visible from Masai Point. It was Stilwell who noticed the first discrepancy. On the morning of March 17th, she measured the height of a hoodoo locally known as the Sentinel, a 53-foot column that had been surveyed at least 4 times since 1951. Her reading came back at 52 feet, 10.3 inches. She assumed equipment error and recalibrated. The second reading was identical. Over the following week, the pattern repeated across every formation they measured. The numbers were consistent within their own data set, and the precision of their instruments was verified repeatedly. But every measurement, height, width, distance between formations, came back exactly 1.7 inches shorter than the historical record. Okonkwo filed his preliminary report on March 28th, flagging the discrepancies but attributing them to possible drift in the reference benchmarks used in earlier surveys. The USGS response was swift and unusual. A memo dated April 3, 1987, requested that the team remain on site for an additional week to verify methodology and recalibrate against primary control points. 2 officials from the Denver office arrived on April 6th, an occurrence Trujillo later described as unprecedented for a routine mapping job. The officials, whose names do not appear in the archive documents, observed the team's work for 3 days. They brought their own equipment. They ran their own measurements. Their readings matched the historical data. The Sentinel measured 53 feet. Every formation, every distance, every elevation aligned with surveys conducted in 1951, 1967, and 1979. The team's original data was not corrected or amended. It was rejected outright, marked in the file as non-conforming to established parameters. No explanation accompanied the designation. Stilwell, in a letter to a colleague written several months later, described the review process as clinical. She wrote, "They didn't tell us we were wrong. They didn't ask us to explain. They simply measured the same rocks we measured, in the same locations, using the same methods, and got different numbers, as if the place had decided to behave for them." Local residents and park employees who interacted with the team during their extended stay offered fragmented observations. Jim Delacroix, a seasonal ranger at the monument in 1987, remembered the surveyors as quiet, professional, nothing unusual. But he also recalled a conversation with Lindquist near the end of their assignment. He asked me if anyone had ever reported the rocks moving, not shifting, like from an earthquake, moving, like they were in different positions depending on when you looked at them. I told him no. He just nodded and didn't say anything else. A campground host named Eleanor Padilla, who had worked at Bonita Canyon for 11 years, noticed that the team began returning to camp earlier and earlier as the weeks progressed. At first, they'd come back at dusk, normal for field work. By the last week, they were done by 2, 3 in the afternoon. They didn't seem scared exactly, more like tired, like they'd been walking for days instead of hours. Okonkwo himself gave only one known interview about the experience, to a geology student researching the monument's survey history in 1994. The student's notes, preserved in the University of Arizona archives, include the following exchange. "Did you ever determine what caused the measurement discrepancy?" "No." "Do you have a theory?" "I have an observation. The land measured smaller for us. Every single reading, 1.7 inches, every time. That's not instrument drift. That's not human error. That's a pattern, and patterns have causes." "What do you think the cause was?" Okonkwo reportedly paused for a long moment before answering. "I think we measured it honestly, and I think it showed us something it doesn't show everyone." The USGS has never issued a formal explanation for the rejected report. A Freedom of Information Act request filed in 2003 yielded only the original memo and a single-page summary noting that the field data collected by Team 87C was deemed inconsistent with verified control measurements and was excluded from the updated topographical series. The control measurements referenced in the summary were the readings taken by the Denver officials during their 3-day review. No independent verification of their work was ever conducted. Dr. Francis Yamamoto, a geophysicist at Northern Arizona University, who reviewed the case in 2011, found the discrepancy statistically improbable but not impossible. She suggested that localized subsidence, a gradual sinking of the land surface, might account for some variation, but acknowledged that 1.7 inches across all measurements, with no corresponding change in relative proportions, did not fit any known geological model. If the ground had settled, she explained, you'd expect some formations to show more change than others. You'd see compression in certain axes, expansion in others. This was uniform. It's as if someone took the entire landscape and scaled it down by a fixed ratio. That doesn't happen in nature. The survey team's instruments were inspected upon their return to Denver. No faults were found. The calibration records matched factory specifications. 2 of the 4 team members, Trujillo and Lindquist, left the USGS within 18 months of the assignment. Neither cited the Chiricahua project in their resignation letters, but neither returned to fieldwork. Stillwell transferred to an administrative role in the agency's Reston, Virginia headquarters. Only Okonkwo continued surveying, though colleagues noted that he never accepted another assignment in the Southwest. In 2017, a hiker near Masai Point discovered a leather-bound notebook wedged beneath a rock outcropping. The notebook contained no identification, but its pages were filled with hand-drawn diagrams of the Hoodoo formations, each annotated with 2 sets of measurements. The first set matched the official USGS data. The second set, written in a different ink, showed figures exactly 1.7 inches smaller. The notebook was turned over to park authorities. Its current whereabouts are unknown. Okonkwo died in 2019. In his final years, according to his daughter, he rarely spoke of his career, but she recalled one detail from a conversation shortly before his death. He told me he still dreamed about Arizona, about walking through a canyon that kept getting narrower, not collapsing, just shrinking, the walls closing in so slowly you couldn't see it happening. He said he'd wake up feeling like he'd been walking for hours. And the strange part was, he never felt like he was trying to get out. He felt like he was trying to measure how much smaller it had gotten since the last time. She paused. He said the number was always the same. The Chiricahua Hoodoos remain open to visitors year-round. Rangers lead interpretive walks. Photographers capture the balanced rocks at sunrise. The official topographical maps reflect the measurements taken by the Denver officials in April of 1987, the readings that matched every survey before and since. Somewhere in a federal archive, a rejected report gathers dust. Its data is internally consistent. Its methodology was sound. Its measurements simply describe a place that was, for 3 weeks in the spring of 1987, slightly smaller than it should have been. No one has surveyed the formations since 2004. The reason for this has never been disclosed. The trail exists only in the memories of people who should never have found it. The Heart of Rock's Loop Trail winds through 9 miles of volcanic spires and balanced rock formations in the heart of Chiricahua National Monument. The path climbs gradually through stands of Apache pine and Arizona cypress before entering a landscape that resembles no other place on Earth. Thousands of rhyolite columns rising from the canyon floor like the ruins of a city built by something other than human hands. The formations have names: Big Balanced Rock, Pinnacle Rock, Duck on a Rock, Punch, and Judy. Rangers have maintained and documented this trail since 1924, and every switchback, every junction, every cairn has been mapped with precision. The monument receives roughly 60,000 visitors per year, most of whom arrive between March and November to escape the desert heat at lower elevations. The Heart of Rock's Loop is the most popular trail in the park, moderately strenuous, well-marked, and rewarding hikers with views that have appeared in geology textbooks for decades. It is not a place where people get lost. It is not a place where the landscape invites confusion. Between 2003 and 2011, 7 hikers, 5 men and 2 women, ranging in age from 26 to 63, reported experiencing something on that trail that should not have been possible. They came from different states. They hiked in different seasons. None knew any of the others existed until a retired park ranger named Samuel Bigay began collecting their accounts in 2014. What he found unsettled him in ways he never fully articulated. The first documented account came from a physical therapist named Donna Whitehorse, who hiked the loop alone on October 12, 2003. She completed the trail in just under 5 hours, stopping frequently to photograph the formations. In her trip journal, later shared with Bigay, she noted a detour she had taken approximately 2/3 of the way through the loop. Noticed a side trail descending to the left, marked by 3 balanced stones arranged in a line. Couldn't find it on the map, but decided to explore. Trail was narrow, well-worn, maybe a quarter mile. Ended at a kind of natural amphitheater, circular, sandy floor, walls about 40 feet high, completely silent, no birds. Stayed for maybe 15 minutes, felt like I shouldn't linger. Returned to main trail without difficulty. When Whitehorse returned to the park the following spring and asked a ranger about the amphitheater, she was told no such formation existed along the Heart of Rocks Loop. She assumed she had confused it with another trail and thought little of it until she saw the map drawn by a hiker named Ronald Bergstrom. Bergstrom, a retired civil engineer from Flagstaff, hiked the loop in April of 2006. He had never met Whitehorse and would not learn of her account for another 8 years. But his description, recorded in a letter to the park superintendent requesting information about the unmarked amphitheater, was nearly identical. 3 balanced rocks, each about knee-high, arranged in a descending line along the left side of the trail. Path was maybe 18 inches wide. Sandy, some loose gravel, led down into a bowl-shaped depression, maybe 200 feet in diameter. The walls were smooth, curved, almost polished, no vegetation inside. I called out, and my voice didn't echo. It just stopped. Bergstrom included a hand-drawn map. When Whitehorse saw it in 2014, she reportedly went pale. "That's exactly what I drew," she told Begay. "The same shape, the same 3 stones, the same angle of descent." Over the following years, Begay identified 5 additional witnesses. Each had contacted the park at some point, some with questions, some with complaints that the trail they remembered had been removed from official maps. Terrence Oduya, a birdwatcher from Tucson, described the amphitheater in 2004 as the most acoustically dead space I've ever entered, like standing inside a void. Margaret Lindqvist, a geology professor from the University of New Mexico, hiked the loop in 2007 and spent an estimated 45 minutes in the amphitheater, taking photographs. When she later reviewed her camera roll, the images were missing, not corrupted, absent entirely, as if they had never been taken. The photos before and after the detour were intact. A married couple from Ohio, Dale and Evelyn Crenshaw, visited in 2009. They described the experience independently in separate emails to the park, Evelyn focusing on the unnatural stillness, Dale on the precision of the 3 marker stones. "They weren't natural," he wrote. "They were placed, deliberately, recently." The final witness Begay located was a man named Hector Salinas, a long-haul truck driver who had stopped at the monument on a whim during a route through southern Arizona in September of 2011. Salinas had no hiking experience, no camera, and no particular interest in rock formations, but his account, delivered to Begay over the phone in 2015, matched the others with uncanny accuracy. 3 little rocks in a row going down. Path looked like people had been using it for years. Led to this round place like a pit, but flat at the bottom. Sand everywhere. I stayed maybe 5 minutes. Felt wrong. Not scared, just wrong. Like I was somewhere I wasn't supposed to be. When Begay asked Salinas to draw a map from memory, the truck driver produced a sketch within millimeters of the one Bergstrom had drawn 9 years earlier. Begay spent 3 years investigating the accounts. He hiked the Heart of Rocks Loop more than 40 times, in every season, at every time of day. He interviewed current and former rangers, examined historical trail maps dating back to 1924, and consulted aerial photography from every available survey. There is no side trail matching the witnesses' descriptions. There is no amphitheater. The 3 balanced stones do not exist. Dr. Patricia Yazzie, a cultural anthropologist at Arizona State University who reviewed Begay's findings, noted that the Chiricahua Apache have no recorded stories about an amphitheater in that region. The oral traditions are rich with references to specific places in those mountains, she explained. Sacred sites, dangerous areas, places of power, but nothing resembling what these hikers described. Either it's a location unknown to the Apache, which seems unlikely given their intimate knowledge of the terrain, or it's something that exists outside traditional understanding. Yazzie also observed a troubling pattern in the witness accounts. All 7 hikers reported difficulty sleeping in the weeks following their visit. 4 described recurring dreams of returning to the amphitheater and finding it occupied. They could never describe who or what was there, only that they were no longer alone. The National Park Service has no official position on the accounts. A spokesperson, reached by a journalist researching the story in 2018, stated only that the Heart of Rock's Loop Trail is well documented and regularly maintained. We are not aware of any unmapped features along the route. Begay requested access to internal park records, including ranger patrol logs and incident reports from the relevant years. His request was denied on the grounds that the documents contained sensitive resource management information. In 2016, Margaret Lindqvist returned to Chiricahua National Monument for the first time in 9 years. She hiked the Heart of Rock's Loop with a GPS unit, a high-resolution camera, and a notebook in which she had copied her original description of the trail. She walked the entire loop twice. She found nothing. In an email to Begay afterward, she wrote, "I stood at the exact point where I know I turned left. The terrain is burned into my memory, but there was nothing there. Just solid rock and scrub brush. No path, no stones, no opening of any kind. I checked my GPS against the map I drew in 2007. I was in the right place. The trail simply wasn't there anymore." Lindqvist has not returned to the monument since. Of the 7 witnesses, only one, Hector Salinas, has expressed any desire to search for the amphitheater again. In his final conversation with Begay, recorded in 2017, he said something that Begay noted in the margins of his research file, circled twice in red ink. "I think about it every day, that round place, that silence. I know it was real. I know I was there. But here's the thing that bothers me most. When I was standing in it, looking up at those walls, I had this feeling, like it wasn't a place I found. It was a place that found me." Samuel Begay died in 2020 at the age of 71. His research notes were donated to the Arizona Historical Society, where they remain uncatalogued. A niece who helped organize his estate reported finding one additional item among his papers, a hand-drawn map dated 2019, showing the Heart of Rock's Loop Trail with a single addition, a side path descending to the left, marked by 3 small circles. In the corner, in Begay's handwriting, were 2 words, "Found it." His family confirmed that he had not visited the monument in over 2 years. His health had not permitted it. The paper the map was drawn on was dated from a notepad he had purchased in 2012. The Heart of Rock's Loop Trail continues to draw thousands of hikers each year. The formations stand as they have stood for 27 million years. The official maps show every junction, every switchback, every cairn. Somewhere in those 9 miles, according to 7 strangers who never met, a trail once descended to the left. 3 balanced stones marked its entrance. The path was narrow, well-worn, and it led to a place that swallowed sound and refused to be photographed. The Park Service has received no reports of the amphitheater since 2011. Rangers do not discuss the accounts with visitors. The file Begay compiled sits in a cardboard box in Tempe, Arizona, alongside a stack of nearly identical maps drawn by people who had no reason to remember the same impossible place. Every evening, the mountain stops listening. Barfoot Lookout stands at 9,200 feet in the Chiricahua Mountains, one of the highest staffed fire lookouts in Arizona. The tower rises above a mixed conifer forest of Douglas fir and southwestern white pine, offering unobstructed views across 4 counties and into the northern reaches of Mexico. On clear days, observers can see storms forming over the Sea of Cortez, more than 150 miles to the southwest. The position has been continuously staffed during fire season since 1925, making it one of the longest operating lookout stations in the Coronado National Forest. The job attracts a particular kind of person: weeks of solitude, no running water. A 14 by 14-foot cabin perched on a steel frame, swaying slightly in high winds. The primary responsibility is simple: watch for smoke, report its location, and maintain radio contact with the district office in Douglas. Communication is essential. A lookout who cannot reach dispatch is a lookout who cannot do the job. The radio equipment at Barfoot has been upgraded several times over the decades, from the original vacuum tube sets of the 1940s to the solid-state VHF systems installed in 1983 to the digital repeaters added in 2009. The antenna array was replaced in 1997. The backup battery system was overhauled in 2015. Every component has been tested, inspected, and certified to Forest Service standards. The dead zone persists. The earliest documented reference to the phenomenon appears in a logbook entry dated July 14, 1963. The lookout that summer was a man named Franklin Deloria, a Navajo veteran of the Korean War who had worked the Chiricahua district for 7 seasons. His entry, written in the precise shorthand common to fire observers of that era, reads, "Radio out 1941 to 2004. No traffic, no static. Receiver dead, transmitter dead. Equipment resumed normal function 2004. No explanation. Third occurrence this week." Deloria reported the anomaly to his supervisor, a district ranger named Howard Pembroke, who drove up to Barfoot the following week to inspect the equipment. According to Pembroke's field notes, preserved in the Coronado National Forest Archives, the radio functioned perfectly during his visit. He tested transmission and reception at multiple times throughout the day, including during the reported window. No problems were observed. The logbook entries continued through the remainder of the 1963 season. Deloria recorded the dead zone on 37 separate occasions between July and September. The timing never varied, 7:41 to 8:04 p.m., 23 minutes exactly. When Deloria returned for the 1964 season, he brought a second radio, a portable unit he had purchased himself, and positioned it at the base of the tower, connected to an independent antenna. On the evening of June 22nd, both radios went silent simultaneously. The portable unit, which had functioned normally all day, displayed no signal. Deloria noted in his log, "Dead zone confirmed independent of tower equipment. Source unknown. Duration consistent." Over the following decades, every lookout stationed at Barfoot reported the same phenomenon. The accounts are remarkably consistent across observers who had no contact with one another and no access to previous logbooks. Martha Redhawk staffed the tower from 1971 to 1974. In an interview conducted by a Forest Service historian in 1992, she described the dead zone as the most unsettling part of the job and the part no one warned me about. She recalled her first experience. "I was calling in my evening weather report, same as every night. Mid-sentence, the radio just stopped, not static, not a click. The sound went away like someone had pulled a plug. I thought the equipment had failed. I spent 20 minutes checking connections, swapping cables. Then, right at 4 minutes after 8, it came back. The dispatcher was asking if I was still there. He said on his end, it sounded like I'd simply stopped transmitting." Red Hawk kept detailed personal notes throughout her 4 seasons. She recorded the dead zone on 112 occasions. The timing never deviated by more than 15 seconds. James Olvera, who worked Barfoot in the 1980s, attempted to document the phenomenon more systematically. He brought a shortwave receiver, a CB radio, and a battery-powered AM/FM unit to the tower in 1986. On the evening of August 3rd, all 4 devices, including the Forest Service VHF system, went silent at 7:41 p.m. The AM radio, tuned to a Tucson news station, produced no sound. The shortwave, scanning multiple frequencies, displayed signal strength at 0 across the entire band. The CB, which had been receiving chatter from truckers on Interstate 10, fell completely silent. At 8:04 p.m., all 4 devices resumed normal operation within seconds of each other. Olvera's report to the district office requested a technical investigation. The response, dated September 19, 1986, stated that atmospheric conditions at high elevation can produce localized interference patterns and recommended no further action. When Olvera pointed out that the phenomenon occurred at the same time, regardless of weather conditions, season, or barometric pressure, he received no reply. The Forest Service has never conducted a formal study of the Barfoot Dead Zone. Internal memos obtained through a Freedom of Information Act request in 2012 reveal that the topic was discussed at a regional communications meeting in 1994, but the outcome of that discussion was redacted. A single sentence remains visible. The matter was referred to the Engineering Division for assessment. No assessment has ever been released. Dr. Leonard Sosi, a radio frequency engineer who consulted for the Federal Communications Commission in the 1990s, reviewed the available documentation at the request of a journalist in 2008. His analysis raised more questions than it answered. "The consistency is what troubles me," Sosi explained. "Interference from natural sources, solar activity, atmospheric ducting, even geological conductivity would show variation. You'd see the window shift by minutes or hours depending on conditions. You'd see some frequencies affected more than others. This is a complete broadband blackout, occurring at precisely the same time, lasting precisely the same duration for over 40 years. That's not interference, that's something else." Sosi attempted to visit Barfoot Lookout in 2009 to conduct his own measurements, but his request for access was denied by the Forest Service. The stated reason was ongoing fire management operations, though no fires were reported in the Chiricahua district that month. Local residents in the communities below the mountain, Portal, Paradise, and the ranches scattered through the San Simon Valley, have their own theories. Eleanor Coteen, whose family has ranched in the Chiricahuas since 1892, recalled her grandfather's explanation. He said the Apache used to call that peak something that translated roughly to the place where voices wait. He didn't know what it meant. Neither do I. But I know my cell phone doesn't work up there after sunset, and I've stopped asking why. In 2017, a lookout named David Acacheta became the first observer to remain at the tower specifically to study the dead zone. Acacheta, a graduate student in atmospheric science at the University of Arizona, had arranged a research leave to staff Barfoot for the season. He brought equipment loaned by the university's radio astronomy program, a spectrum analyzer, a signal strength data logger, and a directional antenna capable of isolating specific frequency bands. His findings, submitted as part of an unpublished thesis, documented 81 consecutive occurrences of the dead zone between June and September. The data showed that the blackout was not a gradual fade, but an instantaneous cessation, signal strength dropping from normal levels to 0 within less than 1/10 of a second. The recovery at 8:04 p.m. was equally abrupt. More troubling was what Acacheta recorded during the dead zone itself. The spectrum analyzer, which should have displayed at least background noise from cosmic radiation and atmospheric electrical activity, showed nothing. The readings were not merely low, they were absent. For 23 minutes each evening, The electromagnetic spectrum around Barfoot Lookout registered as if the equipment were operating in a perfect vacuum. "That's physically impossible," Akacheta wrote in his notes. "There is no natural environment on Earth where you would see zero electromagnetic activity across all frequencies. Even in the most remote locations, even underground, you detect something. At Barfoot, during those 23 minutes, there was nothing. It was as if the tower existed outside the normal parameters of the observable universe." Akacheta's thesis was never completed. He left the university in 2018, citing personal reasons. Attempts to contact him for this account were unsuccessful. His research equipment was returned to the university, where the data logs were found to be corrupted. The files covering the period of his Barfoot assignment could not be recovered. The current lookout at Barfoot, whose name has been withheld at their request, confirmed in 2023 that the dead zone continues. They described it matter-of-factly, without apparent distress. "Every night, same time. Radio goes out, comes back. You get used to it. The first week, it bothered me. Now, I just use those 23 minutes to eat dinner. Nothing I can do about it anyway." When asked if they had ever felt anything unusual during the blackout, the lookout paused before answering. "It's quiet. Quieter than it should be. Up here there's always sound, wind, birds, the tower creaking. During the dead zone, that all goes away too. Not just the radio, everything. I sat outside one night during it just to see. No wind, no insects, no sound at all. And the stars looked wrong. Not different, just closer, like the sky had dropped a few thousand feet. I went back inside after that. Haven't sat outside during it since." The Forest Service continues to staff Barfoot Lookout each fire season. The radio equipment is tested annually and consistently passes inspection. The dead zone appears in no official documentation, no maintenance reports, no incident logs. Lookouts are not briefed on the phenomenon before their assignments. Those who ask questions are told that high-altitude locations sometimes experience atmospheric anomalies and that the situation is under review. The review, if it exists, has been ongoing for 60 years. At 7:41 each evening, the radios at Barfoot Lookout fall silent. At 8:04, they return. In between, for 23 minutes, the highest staffed point in the Chiricahua Mountains exists in a silence that no instrument can explain and no official will acknowledge. The lookouts watch. They wait. They eat their dinners in the quiet. And when the sound returns, they resume their duties as if nothing had happened, because according to every record that matters, nothing has. The stone knew where he would die before he did. The Chiricahua Wilderness encompasses 87,700 acres of rugged volcanic terrain in southeastern Arizona, a federally designated wilderness area since 1964. Its boundaries follow ridgelines and drainages that have remained largely unchanged since the original survey, marked at intervals by standard aluminum caps set into concrete posts. These markers are documented, numbered, and maintained by the Forest Service. Their locations are recorded in cadastral records dating back decades. Every legitimate boundary marker in the Chiricahua Wilderness can be traced to a specific survey team, a specific date, a specific authorization. Every marker except one. The stone sits approximately 200 yards inside the wilderness boundary, near the junction of an unnamed drainage and the Morse Canyon Trail. It is not aluminum and concrete. It is native rhyolite, roughly 18 inches tall and 12 inches wide, its surface weathered but clearly worked by human hands. The inscription faces east, toward the Pelonchillo Mountains, visible on clear days as a dark ridge separating Arizona from New Mexico. 3 lines are carved into the stone, a set of geographic coordinates, a date, and 3 initials. The coordinates read 31 degrees, 52 minutes north by 109 degrees, 12 minutes west. The date reads November 3, 1952, The initials read JLR. The stone was first reported to the Forest Service on September 18, 1994, by a backcountry ranger named Thomas Yellowhorse. His incident report, filed the following day, described the marker as non-standard, apparently hand-carved, origin unknown. He photographed the inscription and submitted a request for historical research. The response, dated October 14, 1994, confirmed that no boundary marker matching the description existed in any survey record for the Chiricahua district. The request was closed without further investigation. The coordinates carved into the stone point to a location 37 miles to the east, deep in the Pelanchillo Mountains on the Arizona-New Mexico border. The terrain there is harsh, steep arroyos, loose scree, and scrub vegetation that provides little shade. It is not on any maintained trail. There is no reason anyone would go there unless they already knew what they were looking for. On November 3, 1952, a single-engine Cessna 170 departed from the Tucson Municipal Airport at approximately 2:15 in the afternoon. The pilot and sole occupant was James Leland Rowe, a 34-year-old geologist employed by the Phelps Dodge Corporation to survey mineral deposits in the border region. His flight plan indicated a destination of Douglas, Arizona, with an estimated arrival time of 3:45 p.m. He never arrived. Search operations began the following morning after Rowe failed to report to the company's Douglas office. Civil Air Patrol aircraft, Army helicopters, and ground teams from Cochise County combed the area between Tucson and Douglas for 11 days. The search was hampered by weather. An early winter storm dropped 8 inches of snow on the higher elevations, and by the vastness of the terrain. On November 14th, the search was officially suspended. No wreckage was located, no distress signal had been received. James Leland Rowe was declared missing and presumed dead. His wife, Catherine, petitioned for a resumption of the search in 1953 and again in 1955. Both requests were denied due to lack of new information. In 1987, a deer hunter named Gerald Fontaine stumbled upon aircraft debris in a narrow canyon in the Pelanchillo Mountains. The wreckage was scattered across approximately 200 yards of rocky terrain, largely buried under decades of sediment and vegetation. Federal Aviation Administration investigators confirmed the debris as consistent with a Cessna 170 of early 1950s manufacture. Registration numbers were illegible, but engine serial numbers matched the aircraft Rowe had been flying on the day of his disappearance. The coordinates carved into the boundary stone in the Chiricahua wilderness, 37 miles to the west, matched the crash site to within 40 meters. Thomas Yellowhorse learned of the Rowe crash in 2001, 7 years after he first reported the boundary stone. A colleague in the Douglas District Office mentioned the case in passing, unaware of any connection. When Yellowhorse heard the initials of the missing geologist, he retrieved his 1994 photographs and checked the inscription, JLR, James Leland Rowe. He contacted the Cochise County Sheriff's Office, which had inherited the missing persons file after the original search was closed. A deputy named Rosa Maldonado agreed to review the documentation. Her report, completed in 2002, confirmed the match between the stone's coordinates and the crash site, discovered in 1987. It also confirmed something more troubling. The boundary stone showed no signs of recent carving. A geologist consulted by the sheriff's office examined Yellowhorse's photographs and estimated, based on weathering patterns and lichen growth, that the inscription was at least 40 years old at the time of discovery, possibly older. If accurate, that estimate placed the carving no later than 1954, 2 years after Rowe's disappearance, but also 2 years after the crash itself. The stone marked the location of an undiscovered crash site decades before anyone knew where to look. The Rowe family was contacted in 2003. Catherine Rowe had died in 1989, never learning the fate of her husband. Their daughter, Ellen Rowe McLeod, agreed to meet with Maldonado and review the evidence. McLeod, then 62 years old, had been 8 when her father disappeared. She remembered little of him, a tall man with a quiet voice, a smell of pipe tobacco, a habit of humming while he worked. She had never visited the Chiricahua Mountains. She had never heard of the boundary stone. When shown the photographs, she studied the initials for a long time before speaking. "My father's handwriting," she said. "I've seen it on old letters, old reports. He made his J's like that, with a little curl at the bottom, and the R. That's his R." McLeod could not explain how her father's initials came to be carved on a stone in a wilderness area he had no documented reason to visit, marking coordinates he could not have known, dated to the day of his death. "He was flying to Douglas," she said. "The Chiricahuas weren't on his route. He had no business there, and even if he had stopped, even if he had somehow carved that stone before he crashed, how would he know where he was going to crash? How would anyone know that? The question has never been answered." A formal archaeological survey of the boundary stone was conducted in 2008 by researchers from the University of Arizona. Their findings confirmed the earlier estimates. The inscription was consistent with mid-20th century carving techniques, and the weathering indicated exposure of approximately 50 to 60 years. Core samples from the lichen colonies on the stone surface suggested colonization beginning no later than 1958. The stone itself was native to the area, a piece of Chiricahua rhyolite, likely quarried from an outcropping within a mile of its current location. Tool marks on the inscription were consistent with a standard geological hammer and chisel, equipment Rowe would have carried as part of his profession. Dr. Martin Littlefeather, the lead researcher, noted in his report that the physical evidence supports a date of creation within a few years of the inscription date, plus or minus 5 years. However, the logical implications of this finding are difficult to reconcile with known events. Littlefeather's report also documented an anomaly that had not been noted in previous examinations. On the back of the stone, partially obscured by soil and root growth, was a second inscription, a single line of numbers that did not correspond to any known coordinate system. The numbers were 741-23. When cross-referenced with other documented phenomena in the Chiricahua region, the sequence matched the timing of the radio dead zone at Barfoot Lookout, 7:41 p.m., lasting 23 minutes. Littlefeather could offer no explanation for the connection. The university declined to fund further research. The boundary stone remains in place. Forest Service policy prohibits the removal of historical artifacts from wilderness areas, and despite its uncertain origin, the stone has been classified as a historic feature of unknown provenance since 2009. It is not marked on any trail map. Rangers do not mention it to visitors. Its existence is acknowledged only in internal documentation accessible through formal records requests. Ellen Rowe McLeod visited the stone in 2011, accompanied by a Forest Service escort. She was 70 years old. She stood before the inscription for nearly an hour, occasionally reaching out to trace the letters with her fingertips. Before leaving, she placed a small object at the base of the stone, a tarnished brass compass that had belonged to her father, recovered from his personal effects after he was declared dead. She had carried it for 60 years. "I don't understand any of this," she told the ranger escorting her. "But I know my father was here. Somehow he was here, and he left something behind so we would know where to find him." She paused, looking east toward the Pelinchillo Mountains. "I just wish I knew how he knew." The ranger who accompanied her that day submitted a brief report noting the visit. In the margins, in handwriting that did not match his own, someone had added a single annotation: "She's not the first." The notation has never been explained. The ranger denied writing it. The original report has since been removed from the file, and its current location is unknown. James Leland Rowe's remains were never recovered from the crash site. The wreckage was deemed too remote and too scattered for practical excavation. The canyon where his plane came down remains unmarked, accessible only to those who already know the coordinates, the same coordinates carved into a stone that should not exist, dated to a day when the man who carved them was still alive, still flying, still unaware that he would never reach his destination. The stone faces east. It has faced east for 70 years. And somewhere in the Pelanchillo Mountains, in a canyon no one visits, the wreckage of a Cessna 170 continues its slow burial beneath the sediment of passing seasons. The boundary stone keeps watch. It has always kept watch. And it marked the grave before there was a body to fill it. It watched them from the first night to the last, and then it watched them from inside their photographs. Cave Creek Canyon cuts through the eastern flank of the Chiricahua Mountains, a riparian corridor renowned among ornithologists as one of the most biodiverse bird habitats in North America. More than 300 species have been documented in the canyon and its tributaries, drawing researchers and enthusiasts from around the world. The South Fork branches off the main drainage approximately 4 miles from the canyon mouth, climbing into a narrow valley where sycamores give way to oak and juniper woodland. The area is remote, accessible only by a rough Forest Service road that becomes impassable during monsoon season. In the spring of 2009, a team from the Arizona State Museum received permits to excavate a site along the South Fork that had been identified through aerial survey in 2004. Preliminary reconnaissance suggested a pre-Columbian habitation site, likely associated with the Mogollon culture that occupied the region between approximately 200 and 1400 CE. The excavation was authorized for 6 weeks, beginning May 4th and concluding June 15th. The team consisted of 4 researchers: Dr. Yolanda Guerrero Peña, the project director, a specialist in Mogollon ceramic typology with 23 years of field experience; Dr. Samuel Nkrumah, a geoarchaeologist from the University of Ghana, completing a visiting fellowship at Arizona State; Rebecca Ashford, a doctoral candidate studying prehistoric water management systems; and Miguel Santillan, a field technician who had worked with Guerrero Peña on 3 previous excavations. They established their base camp approximately 200 meters from the dig site, in a small clearing surrounded by alligator juniper. The location offered flat ground for their tents, proximity to the creek for water, and a clear view of the site. It also offered something else, a direct sight line to a large juniper on the ridge above the excavation, where the owl first appeared on the evening of May 5th. Santillan noticed it first. He had stepped outside his tent around 9:30 p.m. to check the weather and saw the silhouette against the darkening sky, a great horned owl, distinctive ear tufts clearly visible, perched on a horizontal branch approximately 40 meters from the camp. The owl faced the clearing. It did not move. Santillan mentioned the sighting to the others the following morning, noting it as a curiosity. Great horned owls were common in the Chiricahuas. Their presence was unremarkable. What became remarkable was the pattern. The owl appeared every evening at dusk. It perched on the same branch, facing the same direction, maintaining the same posture. It remained motionless until dawn. Guerrero Peña, who kept a detailed field journal, began noting the sightings on May 8th. By May 15th, she had recorded 11 consecutive appearances. The owl never hunted, never called, never shifted position. It simply watched. "I've spent more than 2 decades working in the field," Guerrero Peña wrote in her journal entry for May 20th. "I've encountered wildlife of all kinds: bears, mountain lions, javelina. Animals behave according to their nature. They hunt, they forage, they avoid humans. This owl does none of those things. It arrives at dusk, it leaves at dawn. In between, it does not move. I have never seen a raptor behave this way. I have never heard of a raptor behaving this way. Nkrumah, whose training emphasized empirical observation, attempted to document the owl's behavior more systematically. He borrowed Ashford's camera and took photographs of the juniper branch each evening at 9 p.m. The images confirmed what the team had observed. The owl occupied the same position within centimeters every night. Its head orientation varied slightly, sometimes tilted left, sometimes right, but it always faced the camp. On May 27th, Nkrumah stayed awake through the night to observe the owl's departure. He positioned himself outside his tent with a clear view of the branch and waited. At 5:43 a.m., as the first light touched the ridge, the owl was simply gone. Nkrumah had not looked away. He had not blinked at the critical moment. The branch was occupied, and then it was not. "I cannot explain what I witnessed," he wrote in his portion of the field report. "The owl did not fly away. It did not drop from the branch. It was present, and then it was absent. The transition was instantaneous. The excavation itself proceeded without incident." The team uncovered the remains of a small habitation structure, a partial stone foundation, a fire pit with datable charcoal, and a scatter of ceramic sherds consistent with early Mogollon occupation. Ashford identified evidence of a small check dam that would have diverted seasonal runoff into a catchment basin, suggesting permanent or semi-permanent settlement. The findings were significant but not extraordinary. The site would merit a brief mention in the regional archaeological literature, but the photographs told a different story. On June 3rd, Ashford reviewed images from her digital camera to select candidates for the excavation report. She noticed something unusual in a photograph taken on May 12th. A faint blur in the upper left corner, grayish-white, roughly oval in shape. She assumed it was a lens artifact, a smudge on the protective filter, and made a note to clean the equipment. When she examined additional photographs, she found the same blur. Every image taken at the site displayed an identical anomaly. Same location, same shape, same approximate size. Photographs taken in the morning showed the blur. Photographs taken in the afternoon showed the blur. Photographs taken facing north, south, east, and west showed the blur. Close-ups of ceramic fragments, wide shots of the excavation grid, portraits of team members holding artifacts. The blur appeared in all of them. Ashford brought the discovery to Guerrero Peña, who examined the images with increasing unease. The blur was not consistent with any known photographic artifact. It did not correspond to a scratch on the lens, which would appear in different positions as the camera angle changed. It did not correspond to dust on the sensor, which would produce sharp-edged spots rather than diffuse blurs. It appeared in the same absolute position in every image, as if occupying a fixed point in space that the camera happened to capture, regardless of where it was pointed. Santillan retrieved his own camera, a different make and model than Ashford's, and reviewed his photographs from the excavation. The blur appeared in all of them as well. Same position, same shape. Nkrumah examined his images last. He had taken more than 400 photographs over the course of the dig. Every one contained the blur, except for the photographs he had taken of the owl. In those images, the upper left corner was empty. The team completed their excavation on June 15th, as scheduled. They documented their findings, packed their equipment, and broke camp on the morning of June 16th. The owl did not appear on the evening of June 15th. It did not appear on June 16th. When Santillan glanced back at the juniper ridge as they drove out, the branch where the owl had perched for 41 consecutive nights was empty. Guerrero Peña submitted the excavation report to the Arizona State Museum in August of 2009. The report made no mention of the owl or the photographic anomaly. She considered including both, but ultimately decided against it. I couldn't explain either phenomenon, she said in a 2016 interview with a journalist researching unexplained events in the Chiricahuas. And in archaeology, unexplained phenomena tend to end careers rather than advance them. I documented what I could document. I left out what I couldn't. The photographic anomaly was never formally analyzed. Ashford provided her memory card to a colleague in the university's Imaging Sciences department, hoping for a technical explanation. The colleague examined a sample of approximately 50 images and confirmed that the blur was present in all of them. He could not identify a cause. His informal conclusion, delivered over coffee rather than in writing, was that the camera appeared to be functioning normally and that the anomaly must have originated from something in the environment. He asked me if there was anything at the site that might have caused it, Ashford recalled. Any unusual light source, any reflective surface. I told him there was nothing but dirt, rocks, and an owl that never moved. He laughed. I didn't. Dr. Nkrumah returned to Ghana in 2010 and has not participated in fieldwork in the American Southwest since. In correspondence with Guerrero Peña in 2012, he mentioned that he occasionally dreamed of the excavation, specifically of the owl. In the dreams, he wrote, the owl was not perched on the branch. It was standing in the center of the dig site, in the exact location where the team had uncovered the fire pit. It was looking directly at him. The blur was gone from the photographs, but something else had replaced it. He did not describe what. Santillan continued working as a field technician until 2018, when he retired to care for an elderly parent. He never discussed the Cave Creek excavation with colleagues, but his daughter reported in 2021 that he had mentioned it once, late in his life, during a conversation about regrets. He said there was a job once where he knew they were being watched, she recounted. He said the watching didn't stop when they left. He said sometimes, when he looked at old photographs of himself from around that time, he could see something in the corner of the frame. He didn't say what. He didn't want to. Guerrero Peña retired from the Arizona State Museum in 2022. Among her personal effects, colleagues found a sealed envelope labeled South Fork, 2009. Inside was a single photograph from the excavation, a shot of the dig site at midday, the team visible in the middle distance, the mountains rising behind them. The upper left corner was torn away, removed with scissors or a razor blade. On the back of the photograph, in Guerrero Peña's handwriting, was a single sentence. It's still there. The South Fork site has not been revisited since the 2009 excavation. The permits were not renewed. The ceramics and charcoal samples remain in storage at the Arizona State Museum, cataloged but unanalyzed. The field notes are available to researchers upon request, though no one has requested them. The juniper where the owl perched still stands on the ridge above the site. Rangers who patrol the area report nothing unusual. No owls have been observed there since the excavation concluded. The branch where the owl sat for 41 nights is partially obscured now by new growth, barely visible from the clearing where the team made their camp. But the photographs remain, hundreds of them, stored on hard drives and memory cards, each one containing the same small blur in the upper left corner, the same shape, the same position, the same presence that arrived when the digging began and never entirely left. Someone documented a summer that never happened in a place that never was. Rustler Park sits at an elevation of 8,500 feet in the Chiricahua Mountains, a subalpine meadow surrounded by stands of Engelmann spruce and corkbark fir. The campground there is small, approximately 25 sites, and popular with hikers seeking access to the high country trails that branch into the surrounding wilderness. The park takes its name from the cattle rustlers, who allegedly used the remote meadow as a hideout in the 1880s, driving stolen herds through the mountains to evade lawmen in the valleys below. The Forest Service has maintained the campground since 1936. Records from the Coronado National Forest document every structure ever built at Rustler Park. The original ranger cabin, constructed in 1938 and demolished in 1967, the vault toilets installed in 1972, the fee station added in 1994. Every improvement, every modification, every temporary installation has been logged and archived. The bureaucracy of public land management is nothing if not thorough. There is no record of a research station at Rustler Park. There has never been a research station at Rustler Park. No permits were ever issued for scientific equipment to be installed there. No academic institution has ever claimed affiliation with the location. And yet, the journal exists. Amanda Trujillo founded on the afternoon of September 23, 2017. She was a 34-year-old high school biology teacher from Sierra Vista, spending a long weekend hiking the trails around Rustler Park before the campground closed for the season. A late summer storm the previous week had brought down several trees in the area, including a large ponderosa pine near the northern edge of the meadow. Trujillo, an amateur naturalist, stopped to examine the root ball of the fallen tree, curious about the soil composition at that elevation. Wedged between two thick roots, approximately 18 inches below the original ground surface, was a rectangular object wrapped in oilcloth. The cloth was stained and brittle, but intact. Inside was a leather-bound journal, approximately 6 inches by 8 inches, with a cracked spine and water-damaged pages. Trujillo did not open the journal in the field. She photographed its location, made notes about the discovery, and packed it carefully in her backpack. She reported the find to the camp host that evening, who suggested she contact the Forest Service office in Douglas on Monday. She read the journal that night by headlamp in her tent, while rain drummed on the fly. The first entry was dated June 1, 1961. The last was dated August 28th of the same year. 89 days of observations, sketches, weather data, and personal reflections, written in a small, precise hand using blue-black ink. The author identified himself only by initials, EMW, M. The entries described a summer spent at a research station called Rustler Peak Listening Post, a facility EMW described as being located 200 meters north of the main meadow in a clearing created by a 1958 lightning fire. The station, according to the journal, consisted of 3 structures: a main cabin with sleeping quarters and a small laboratory, a storage shed for equipment, and an antenna array housed in a wooden enclosure, designed to resemble a water tank for purposes of concealment. The journal detailed the work conducted at the station with clinical precision. EMW and 3 colleagues, identified as Dr. Harrison Polk, Dr. Miriam Castellanos, and a technician referred to only as Lundgren, were engaged in what the author called subsurface acoustic monitoring. Their equipment, described in several entries, included seismographs, signal amplifiers, and directional receivers embedded in boreholes drilled to a depth of 40 meters. The purpose of the monitoring was never explicitly stated. EMW referred obliquely to signals originating below the granitic basement and patterns inconsistent with tectonic activity. An entry dated July 14th noted, "Third anomalous reading this week. Polk believes the source is between 2 and 4 kilometers depth. Castellanos disagrees, argues the waveform suggests something shallower, possibly within the volcanic layer itself. Lundgren says nothing, as usual. The equipment continues to record. We continue to listen." The entries grew more unsettled as the summer progressed. On July 29th, EMW wrote, "The signals have become periodic. 11 minutes of activity, 43 minutes of silence, repeating without variation. Polk has begun referring to it as the pulse. I find the term uncomfortably anthropomorphic, but I cannot suggest a better one." On August 10th, Castellanos insists we are detecting natural resonance, some interaction between groundwater and subsurface cavities. I would find this reassuring if the periodicity did not remain so exact. 11 minutes, 43 minutes, every cycle, for 12 days now. Natural systems do not behave with this precision. On August 19th, Lundgren has stopped speaking, not to me, to anyone. He sits at the monitoring station for hours, headphones on, eyes closed. When I asked what he was listening to, he removed the headphones and offered them to me. I declined. I have stopped wearing headphones during my shifts. I prefer to read the waveforms on paper. The paper does not know what it is recording. Trujillo delivered the journal to the Coronado National Forest Supervisor's Office on September 25, 2017. The staff member who received it, a public affairs specialist named Delia Fuentes, photographed the document and forwarded it to the regional archaeologist for assessment. The regional archaeologist, Dr. Patrick Goodwin, examined the journal over the following week. His report, completed on October 4th, confirmed that the materials were consistent with the stated date. The leather binding was of a type manufactured primarily in the 1950s and early 60s. The paper stock matched brands commonly used in government and academic field journals of the era. The ink had faded in patterns consistent with 60 years of aging. The handwriting was analyzed by a forensic document examiner at the request of the Forest Service. Her conclusion, delivered in November of 2017, stated that the writing showed no signs of modern forgery. The pen pressure, letter formation, and spacing were consistent with someone trained in penmanship during the 1930s or 40s, an era when cursive writing was taught with standardized methods that produced distinctive characteristics. The journal, by every available measure, was exactly what it appeared to be, a document written in 1961 by someone who spent a summer at Rustler Park. But the research station did not exist. Goodwin searched every available archive, Forest Service records for the Chiricahua District, Bureau of Land Management files, University of Arizona research permits, Air Force and Army documentation for installations in southern Arizona during the Cold War, Los Alamos National Laboratory project logs, Sandia National Laboratory's field studies. Nothing matched. No Rustler Peak listening post, no Dr. Harrison Polk, no Dr. Miriam Castellanos, no Lundgren, no permits for borehole drilling, no equipment manifests, no funding authorizations, no personnel records, no indication that anyone had ever conducted subsurface acoustic research at Rustler Park or anywhere in the Chiricahua Mountains. The final entries of the journal documented what EMW called the event of August 26th. The signal changed at 03:17 this morning. The 11-minute pattern has ended. The pulse is now continuous. Castellanos has requested extraction. Polk has refused, says we cannot leave until we understand what we are hearing. Lundgren has not moved from the monitoring station in 19 hours. He has removed his headphones, but remains seated, staring at the equipment. He says the signal is not coming through the equipment anymore. He says he can hear it without the headphones. He says it has been audible since August 23rd. I do not hear anything. I do not want to hear anything. The entry for August 27th is brief. Extraction approved. Helicopter arrives tomorrow at 0800. Polk has agreed to leave. Castellanos has begun dismantling the antenna array. Lundgren remains at the monitoring station. He has asked us to leave him behind. He says the listening is almost complete. The final entry, dated August 28, 1961, consists of a single paragraph. We departed Rustler Park at 0822. The helicopter pilot asked about the fourth member of our team. I told him there were only 3 of us. Castellanos said nothing. Polk confirmed. 3 researchers, no technician. The pilot checked his manifest and agreed. 3 passengers, as scheduled. I do not remember Lundgren boarding the helicopter. I do not remember seeing him this morning. I am no longer certain there was ever a fourth member of our team. The station is empty now. The equipment is buried. Polk says we will file no report. Castellanos says there is nothing to report. I am writing this in transit, 2,000 feet above the mountains. The peaks are beautiful in the morning light. I will not return here. I will remember nothing. By tonight, there will be nothing to remember. The journal is currently held in the Special Collections Archive of the Arizona State Museum, cataloged as Anonymous Field Journal, Chiricahua Mountains, circa 1961. Access is restricted to researchers with documented academic affiliation. Trujillo, who discovered the document, has visited Rustler Park 3 times since 2017. On each occasion, she has walked to the northern edge of the meadow where the ponderosa pine once stood. The tree has been removed, the root ball filled in, the ground leveled by Forest Service maintenance crews. There is no sign that anything was ever buried there. On her most recent visit, in 2022, Trujillo brought a metal detector borrowed from a friend in the local historical society. She spent 4 hours scanning the area where the journal had been found, working in a methodical grid pattern. At a depth of approximately 2 feet, in a location roughly 30 meters north of the journal's burial site, the detector registered a strong signal. Trujillo marked the spot but did not dig. Excavation on Forest Service land without a permit is a federal offense. She reported the detection to the Douglas Ranger Station. A note was added to the site file. No excavation has been authorized. The journal's author has never been identified. No records exist of anyone with the initials EMW working for the Forest Service, any university, or any government agency in the Chiricahua region during the relevant period. The names mentioned in the text, Polk, Castellanos, Lundgren, do not appear in any database, any publication, any archive. The listening equipment described in the journal, if it exists, remains buried somewhere in the meadow at Rustler Park. The boreholes, if they were ever drilled, have never been located. The signals, whatever they were, have not been detected by any subsequent research. But the campground remains open each summer, from April through October. Hikers come and go. Tents rise and fall in the meadow. At night, the spruce forest is silent except for wind and the occasional call of a great horned owl in the darkness. The ground beneath the campsites is solid, undisturbed, covered in a thick layer of pine needles accumulated over decades. Rustler Park is quiet now. It has always been quiet. The journal describes 3 months of listening, but the Forest Service has no record of anyone ever hearing anything at all. On one night in 1958, the animals of the Sulphur Springs Valley forgot how to make sound. The valley stretches north to south between the Chiricahua Mountains to the east and the Dragoon Mountains to the west, a basin of high desert grassland that has supported cattle ranching since the 1870s. The land is sparse but workable, creosote and mesquite giving way to grama grass in the higher elevations, seasonal washes cutting through the flats, windmills drawing water from the deep aquifer that underlies the region. In 1958, approximately 40 ranching families worked the western foothills of the Chiricahuas, their homesteads scattered across an area of roughly 900 square miles. They knew their animals. In that era, before satellite phones and motion sensor cameras, livestock were monitored by instinct and routine. Ranchers could read the mood of a herd from a quarter-mile away. They knew the difference between the bark of a dog announcing a visitor and the bark warning of a predator. They knew the sound of cattle settling for the night and the sound of cattle sensing something wrong. On August 14, 1958, the animals made no sound at all. The earliest known account comes from Hector Maldonado, whose family had ranched a section of land near the mouth of Whitetail Canyon since 1893. Maldonado was 17 years old that summer, responsible for the evening feeding of the horses and the locking of the chicken coops. In a recorded interview conducted by his granddaughter in 2004, he described the evening in detail. I noticed it around 7 o'clock, maybe a little after. The dogs didn't come when I called. We had 3, 2 heelers, and an old shepherd mix. They always met me at the barn. That night, nothing. I found them behind the water tank, all 3 of them lying flat on the ground, not sleeping, eyes open, just lying there. I thought they were sick. I thought maybe they'd gotten into something. Maldonado tried to rouse the dogs, but they would not respond. They breathed normally. Their eyes tracked his movements, but they did not rise, did not whimper, did not make any vocalization. I went to check the horses next. Same thing. Standing in the corral, completely still, not eating, not shifting around, just standing there like statues. I walked right up to them, touched them, tried to lead them. They wouldn't move. Their muscles were relaxed. It wasn't like they were frozen. They just chose not to move. Maldonado reported the situation to his father, who dismissed it as an unusual reaction to weather. But the weather that night was unremarkable. Clear skies, mild temperature, no wind to speak of. The elder Maldonado went to bed early, unconcerned. Hector stayed awake, watching the animals from the porch, waiting for something to change. Nothing changed until dawn. At first light, maybe 5:30, the rooster crowed. Just like that. Normal. The dogs got up and came over to me like nothing had happened. The horses started moving around looking for their feed. I went inside and ate breakfast. Nobody talked about it, but I knew something had happened. I knew it wasn't normal. The Maldonado account might have remained a family oddity if not for the work of a schoolteacher named Francis Deloria, who collected oral histories from the Sulphur Springs Valley in the 1980s. Deloria, a member of the Chiricahua Apache Nation who had grown up in the region, was compiling stories for a local heritage project when she began to notice a pattern. Multiple families mentioned the same night. Raymond Kessler, whose father had owned a dairy operation near Elfrida, told Deloria that his entire herd of 43 Holstein cows stood motionless in the pasture from sundown to sunup on August 14, 1958. They did not lie down. They did not graze. They stood in the same positions, facing roughly east toward the Chiricahuas, for approximately 11 hours. My father walked through the herd 3 times during the night, Kessler recalled. He thought there was a predator, a mountain lion maybe, but the cows weren't scared. They weren't agitated. They were just waiting, like they were listening to something. Deloria collected 7 additional accounts from families spread across a 30-mile radius. In each case, the details aligned. Dogs that would not bark, horses that would not move, cattle that stood in silent stillness. Chickens did not roost normally, but huddled in corners of their coops. Cats, typically vocal at night, were absent or silent. One rancher reported that his mule, an animal notorious for its stubbornness, stood at the fence line for the entire night, without shifting its weight from one leg to the other. The silence was total. No coyotes called from the hills, no owls hooted, no nightjars sang. One witness, a woman named Esperanza Ochoa, described stepping outside around midnight to check on a sick calf and hearing nothing at all. Not even crickets, she told Deloria. I've lived in this valley my whole life. There are always crickets. That night, nothing. It was like someone had turned off the world. Deloria attempted to find official documentation of the event. She contacted the National Weather Service, which confirmed that no unusual atmospheric conditions were recorded in southeastern Arizona on August 14, 1958. She queried the United States Geological Survey, which reported no seismic activity in the region during that period. She reached out to nearby military installations, Fort Huachuca and Davis-Monthan Air Force Base, but received no response to her inquiries. A local veterinarian named Dr. Harold Whitfield, who had practiced in Wilcox from 1952 until his retirement in 1986, told Deloria that he had received no emergency calls on the night in question. No rancher reported sick or injured animals the following day. Whatever had affected the livestock left no physical trace. Animals don't behave that way, Whitfield said in his 1984 interview. I've seen stock react to earthquakes before they hit, to storms before they arrive. They get agitated, nervous. They move more, not less. What you're describing is the opposite. It's like every animal in the valley went into some kind of trance. I've never heard of anything like it before or since. Deloria compiled her findings into a manuscript she titled The Silent Night of Sulphur Springs, intending to submit it to the Arizona Historical Review. The manuscript was never published. Deloria died in 1991, and her papers were donated to the Cochise County Historical Society, where they remained uncatalogued until 2009. When the manuscript was finally processed, a graduate student named Michael Sandoval discovered something Deloria had apparently overlooked, or perhaps deliberately omitted. Among her interview notes was a single page, handwritten, describing a conversation with an unnamed source identified only as former military, stationed Davis-Monthan 57 to 59. The source claimed that on the night of August 14, 1958, radar operators at Davis-Monthan Air Force Base detected what was logged as atmospheric interference over the Chiricahua Mountains. The interference lasted approximately 11 hours, beginning at sunset and ending at dawn. The source described the radar signature as unlike anything in his experience. Not a plane, not weather, not equipment malfunction. The scope showed something over the mountains, a presence, he called it, not moving, just there, like it was waiting. When the sun rose, the signature vanished. The incident was logged as unexplained, and, according to the source, was never investigated further. He had not spoken of it for more than 25 years when Deloria contacted him. He said the official position was that nothing had happened, Deloria wrote in her notes. But he also said that for years afterward, pilots avoided flying over the Chiricahuas after dark if they could help it, not because of orders, because of the feeling. Sandoval attempted to verify the account through Freedom of Information Act requests to Davis-Monthan Air Force Base. The response, received in 2011, stated that radar logs from 1958 were no longer available. They had been destroyed in 1973 as part of routine records management. The families of the Sulphur Springs Valley no longer speak openly about the night of August 14, 1958. Most of the original witnesses have died. Their children and grandchildren know the story, but tend to dismiss it as folklore, the kind of exaggerated tale that accumulates around rural communities over generations. But a few families still mark the date. Rosa Maldonado Vega, Hector Maldonado's daughter, told an interviewer in 2019 that her family observes August 14th with a quiet ritual. They keep the dogs inside after sunset. They check on the horses before dark. They do not go outside between dusk and dawn. My father never told me why, she said. He just told me what to do. He said the night came once and it might come again. He said when the animals stop talking, you stop talking too. You stay inside. You wait. And when morning comes, you don't ask questions. When pressed on whether she believed the story, Vega paused for a long moment before answering. I believe my father. I believe what he saw, and I believe that some things don't need explanations. They just need respect. The Sulphur Springs Valley remains ranch country today. The population is smaller than it was in 1958. Many of the old homesteads have been consolidated or abandoned, but cattle still graze the flats, and dogs still bark at coyotes in the night, on most nights. The animals of the valley have not fallen silent again in 67 years. The ranchers who remain do not discuss the possibility. They do their work, tend their herds, and listen to the sounds they have always listened to, the lowing of cattle, the whinny of horses, the familiar chorus of crickets and nightjars that confirms the world is still working the way it should. August 14th comes and goes each year like any other summer day. The sun rises, the sun sets, the dogs bark at shadows in the dark, and in a few quiet houses along the western edge of the Chiricahuas, families keep their animals close and wait for morning. The Park Service erased a place from its records, but forgot to erase it from the memories of those who had seen it. Fort Bowie National Historic Site occupies approximately 1,000 acres in Apache Pass, a narrow corridor through the Chiricahua and Dos Cabezas Mountains that served as a critical route for travelers, soldiers, and mail carriers in the 19th century. The fort itself was established in 1862 and abandoned in 1894, its adobe walls slowly dissolving into the desert from which they had been built. Today, the site is managed by the National Park Service, accessible only by a 1.5-mile trail that winds through grassland and mesquite, past the ruins of the Butterfield Stage Station and the cemetery where soldiers and civilians rest beneath weathered headstones. The park's administrative records date to 1964, when Fort Bowie was designated a National Historic Site. The archives contain the expected documentation, visitor statistics, maintenance reports, archaeological surveys, wildlife inventories, thousands of pages chronicling the management of a small but historically significant parcel of federal land. Buried within these records in files that were once classified as resource-sensitive and later partially declassified in 2004 are references to a location that appears on no current map. Site 7C. The first documented reference appears in a resource management plan dated March 1972. The plan, authored by a ranger named Douglas Featherstone, includes a list of natural features requiring regular monitoring. Most are unremarkable: seasonal washes prone to erosion, archaeological sites vulnerable to looters, wildlife corridors used by javelina and mule deer. Item 7 on the list reads, Thermal Anomaly Cluster, Designated Sites, 7A through 7D. Quarterly temperature monitoring required, 7C flagged for additional observation due to irregular behavior patterns. See attached geological survey, restricted. The attached survey was not included in the declassified files. Additional references appear in quarterly reports from 1972 through 1981. The entries are brief, clinical, and increasingly cryptic. June 1973. Site 7C temperature variance recorded at 37 degrees Fahrenheit within 2-hour observation window. No apparent external cause. Recommend continued monitoring. September 1975. Water level at 7C has risen approximately 14 inches since last quarterly visit. No precipitation recorded in area during intervening period. Source of additional water unknown. December 1977. 7C exhibited complete thermal inversion during observation. Temperature at surface registered 91 degrees Fahrenheit at 0900 hours, dropped to 34 degrees Fahrenheit by 0945 hours. Ambient air temperature unchanged. Phenomenon lasted approximately 6 hours before stabilizing. March 1979. Recommend discontinuation of 7C monitoring program. Site behavior increasingly inconsistent with known geothermal models. Staff have reported unease during observation periods. Request guidance from regional office. The final reference to Site 7C in the declassified records is dated August 1981. 7C monitoring suspended pending review. Site access restricted to authorized personnel only. By 1983, All references to Site 7A through 7D had been removed from Fort Bowie's resource management plans. The thermal anomaly cluster does not appear in any subsequent documentation. The ranger who authored the original 1972 report, Douglas Featherstone, died in 1994. His personal papers, donated to Northern Arizona University after his death, contain no mention of Site 7C or any thermal features at Fort Bowie. A colleague who worked with Featherstone in the 1980s, contacted by a researcher in 2012, said he had never heard Featherstone discuss geothermal monitoring of any kind. But another ranger remembered. Vincent Carrero worked at Fort Bowie from 1976 to 1984, initially as a seasonal interpreter and later as a full-time resource management specialist. In 2018, at the age of 71, Carrero agreed to an interview with a journalist investigating anomalous entries in declassified Park Service records. The interview was conducted at Carrero's home in Benson, Arizona. He spoke for nearly 3 hours, and his account, though filtered through 4 decades of memory, aligned closely with the fragmentary documentary record. Site 7C was a hot spring, Carrero said. At least, that's what we called it. It was in a little draw about half a mile northeast of the fort ruins, in an area we didn't encourage visitors to explore. Not dangerous, just remote. Off the main trail. Carrero described the spring as roughly 4 feet in diameter, with a depth that varied from a few inches to several feet, depending on when it was observed. The water was usually warm, bathwater temperature, he said, but not always. That was the thing about it. You never knew what you were going to get. I visited it maybe 15, 20 times over the years. Sometimes it was warm, sometimes it was cold enough to numb your hand in seconds. Once, I remember this clearly, it was steaming when I arrived, like a pot about to boil. I came back an hour later, and it was frozen, not cold. Frozen, a skin of ice on the surface, in July. When asked to explain the phenomenon, Carrero shook his head. We couldn't explain it. Nobody could. We had a geologist come out from the University of Arizona in 78 or 79. He spent 2 days taking measurements, collecting samples. I drove him back to Tucson afterward. He didn't say a word the whole trip, just sat there, staring out the window. A few weeks later, we got a letter saying his analysis was inconclusive and that further study would require funding. The university didn't have Carrero's account of Site 7C included details that did not appear in the declassified records. He described the water as having an unusual quality, not discolored or contaminated, but somehow wrong. It didn't reflect light the way water should. You'd look at the surface and see the sky, the rocks, your own face. But the reflection was always a little off, a little delayed, like the water was deciding whether to show you what was really there. He recalled that animals avoided the site. No tracks around it, no birds nearby. I've worked in the desert my whole career. Animals go to water. That's just how it works. But nothing went to 7C, not even insects, and he remembered the silence. Whenever I was there, I couldn't hear anything. Not the wind, not the birds, not my own footsteps. It was like standing inside a bubble. The sound came back when I walked away, gradually, like turning up a volume knob. But at the spring itself, nothing. Just the water, doing whatever it was doing. Carrero was asked why monitoring of the site had been discontinued. I don't know the official reason. What I know is that by 81, nobody wanted to go out there anymore. We had 3 rangers assigned to the monitoring rotation, and all 3 of us found excuses to skip our shifts. Sick days, vehicle trouble, personal emergencies. It wasn't coordinated. We just didn't want to be there. He paused before continuing. The last time I visited 7C was in the spring of 82. The water was gone, not dried up. The basin was still there, the rocks around it still wet. But the spring itself was empty, like someone had pulled a plug. I reported it, and my supervisor said they'd look into it. A month later, I was transferred to a site in New Mexico. When I came back to Fort Bowie for a visit in '89, I tried to find the location. I couldn't. The draw was there, the rocks were there, but the spring was gone, not empty, gone, like it had never existed. A search of geological surveys for the Fort Bowie area reveals no record of thermal springs within the park boundaries. The Arizona Geological Survey's database of hot springs, updated in 2016, lists no features in Apache Pass or the surrounding region. Groundwater studies conducted by the Bureau of Reclamation in the 1990s make no mention of geothermal activity. The restricted geological survey referenced in Featherstone's 1972 report has never been located. Multiple Freedom of Information Act requests, filed between 2004 and 2020, have yielded no additional documentation. The Park Service's official response has been consistent. No records matching your request were found in our archives. Carrero's account remains unverified. No other former Fort Bowie staff members have come forward to corroborate his story. The journalist who conducted the 2018 interview attempted to locate the site Carrero described, using his directions and a topographical map from the 1970s. She found the draw he mentioned approximately half a mile northeast of the fort ruins. The terrain matched his description: rocky slopes, desert scrub. A small depression at the bottom of the draw, roughly 4 feet across, filled with sand and dead vegetation. No water, no evidence of water. No indication that water had ever been present. She stood at the edge of the depression for approximately 15 minutes, taking photographs and making notes. In her write-up of the visit, published in a regional magazine in 2019, she included an observation that she could not explain. While I was standing there, I noticed something strange. I could hear the wind blowing through the grass on the ridge above me. I could hear a raven calling somewhere to the south. But where I was standing, in the draw, at the edge of that empty depression, I couldn't hear my own breathing. I put my hand on my chest to make sure I was still breathing. I was. But I couldn't hear it. The silence was specific, localized, confined to that exact spot. When I stepped back 3 feet, the sound returned. She did not return to the site. Fort Bowie National Historic Site remains open to visitors year-round. The trail to the ruins passes through terrain that has changed little since the 19th century. Rangers lead interpretive walks, explaining the history of the Apache Wars, the role of the Butterfield Overland Mail, the daily lives of soldiers stationed at this remote outpost. They do not mention Site 7C. The designation does not appear on any current map, any brochure, any interpretive display. The quarterly monitoring reports that once documented its existence sit in an archive in Tucson, accessible only to researchers who know what to request. The spring, if it ever existed, has left no trace. The water that rose and fell without explanation, that froze in summer and steamed in winter, that refused to reflect light properly or attract the animals that should have needed it, that water has vanished from the land and from the record. Only the silence remains in a small draw half a mile northeast of the ruins, where a retired ranger once stood and watched the desert do something it should not have been able to do. Vincent Carrero died in 2021. His family scattered his ashes in the Chiricahua Mountains, at a location he had specified in his will. The coordinates were not disclosed. When asked by a family friend why he had chosen that particular spot, Carrero's widow said he had told her only that it was a place that needed a witness. She did not ask him to explain what he meant. She said she was not sure she wanted to know. Someone has been singing in Cochise Stronghold for longer than anyone has been listening. The Dragoon Mountains rise from the San Pedro Valley approximately 60 miles west of the Chiricahua Range, a series of granite domes and spires that appear from a distance like the vertebrae of some immense creature half buried in the desert. Cochise Stronghold is a natural fortress within these mountains, a canyon of towering rock walls, seasonal springs, and dense oak woodland that provided refuge for the Chiricahua Apache leader Cochise and his band during the 1860s and 70s. The terrain is nearly impenetrable from below, offering clear sight lines of any approaching force while concealing those within. Cochise died here in 1874, reportedly buried in a hidden location that has never been found despite more than a century of searching. The canyon bears his name and his legacy, a place where history feels unusually present. The Coronado National Forest maintains a small campground in the western portion of the stronghold, offering a handful of sites beneath the oaks where visitors can spend the night surrounded by the same rock walls that once sheltered warriors. Most visitors report nothing unusual. They hike the trails, photograph the formations, and sleep peacefully beneath stars undimmed by city light. But some visitors hear the singing. The earliest documented account appears in the journal of a surveyor named William Harker, who camped in the stronghold in September of 1891 while mapping the newly established Dragoon Forest Reserve. Harker's entry for September 14th reads, "Woken at approximately 2 o'clock by what I took to be voices, musical in quality as of a group singing in unison. Could not determine direction or distance. Language unknown. Melody unfamiliar. Searched the immediate area and found nothing. Returned to camp. Singing had ceased." Harker made no further mention of the incident in his journal. His survey was completed without additional anomaly. The next recorded account comes from 1927, when a rancher named Esteban Moreno reported to the Cochise County Sheriff that he had heard church music while searching for stray cattle in the stronghold. Moreno, a lifelong Catholic, described the sound as resembling a choir singing hymns, but emphasized that he did not recognize the words or the melody. He estimated the singing lasted approximately 45 minutes before fading. A deputy who accompanied Moreno to the location the following night heard nothing. Throughout the 1930s and 40s, similar reports surfaced sporadically, always from campers or travelers who had spent the night in the stronghold, always describing the same general phenomenon: choral music heard between 2 and 3 in the morning, sung in an unknown language impossible to locate or record. The accounts shared certain characteristics. The music was described as beautiful but unsettling. It did not echo or reverberate the way sound normally behaves in a canyon. It maintained a constant volume regardless of the listener's position or movement, and it produced, in those who heard it, a profound sense of grief, not fear, but sorrow, as if the music itself carried an emotional weight that transcended language. In 1943, during the height of World War II, a small detachment of soldiers was stationed at the ruins of Fort Bowie to guard against potential sabotage of the Southern Pacific Railroad, which passed through the region approximately 15 miles to the north. The posting was considered uneventful. The threat of sabotage was largely theoretical, and soldiers rotated through on brief assignments before being sent to more active theaters. One of these soldiers was a private named Leonard Kowalczyk, a 22-year-old from Milwaukee who had enlisted in 1941 and spent most of his service in administrative roles due to a childhood injury that limited his mobility. Kowalczyk wrote frequent letters to his mother, and these letters were preserved by his family after his death in 1987. In a letter dated July 19, 1943, Kowalczyk described a weekend pass during which he and 2 other soldiers had camped at Cochise Stronghold. "We set up near the spring where the oaks are thickest. Beautiful country, Ma. You would not believe how different it is from home. The rocks here are pink and orange, and at sunset they look like they're on fire." The letter continues with mundane details: the food they ate, a rattlesnake one of the men had killed, before shifting tone. "I woke up in the middle of the night and heard singing. At first I thought it was Hendrix playing a trick, but he was asleep, and so was O'Brien. The singing was coming from somewhere in the canyon, maybe up in the rocks. It sounded like children, a whole group of them singing something I didn't recognize. Not English, not Spanish, not anything I've ever heard. I got up and walked toward it, but I couldn't find it. The sound didn't get louder or softer no matter where I went. After a while, it just stopped. Kowalczyk's letter concludes with a passage that has puzzled researchers who have examined the correspondence. The children are still here. I hear them every night. I don't think they know the war is over. The statement is chronologically impossible. Kowalczyk wrote the letter in July 1943. The war would not end for another 2 years. He had camped at Cochise stronghold only once, on a single weekend pass. He could not have heard the singing every night. No subsequent letters mention the stronghold or the singing. Kowalczyk was transferred to a supply depot in California in August 1943 and spent the remainder of the war there. He never returned to Arizona. Modern accounts of the phenomenon continue to accumulate, though they remain anecdotal and unverified. A retired schoolteacher named Dorothy Ashworth camped at Cochise Stronghold in October of 1978 with her husband. In a letter to the Arizona Daily Star published in 1981, she described being woken at approximately 2:15 by what she called the most beautiful and the most heartbreaking music I have ever heard. It was voices, many voices, singing in perfect harmony. The language was nothing I recognized, not Latin, not any Native American language I'm familiar with, not anything from the European tradition. The melody was simple, almost like a lullaby, but there was something underneath it, a sadness, a longing. I lay in my sleeping bag and wept, and I did not know why. Ashworth's husband, sleeping beside her, heard nothing. In 1994, a graduate student in ethnomusicology named Robert Sinigini spent 3 nights at Cochise Stronghold with recording equipment, attempting to capture the phenomenon for analysis. His recordings captured only ambient sound, wind, insects, the occasional call of an owl. But on the second night, at 2:27 in the morning, Sinigini heard the singing himself. His field notes describe the experience. Choral in nature, estimated 12 to 20 voices, mixed range. Melody pentatonic, but not conforming to any scale I recognize. Harmonic intervals consistently unusual, minor seconds and tritones in places where Western music would avoid them. Duration approximately 31 minutes. No discernible crescendo or diminuendo throughout. Music ended abruptly, mid-phrase. Sinigini's recording from that night shows a flat waveform during the period he documented. The equipment captured nothing. I was wearing headphones connected to the recorder, he wrote. I could hear the singing clearly with my own ears. Through the headphones, silence. It was as if the sound existed in a frequency the equipment could not detect, or as if it existed only for me. The Chiricahua Apache, whose ancestral connection to Cochise Stronghold is undisputed, have no recorded oral tradition describing choral music in the canyon. Elders consulted by researchers in the 1980s and 2000s uniformly stated that they had never heard of such a phenomenon. Cochise Stronghold is a sacred place, one elder, who asked not to be identified, told an anthropologist in 2003, but its power is in its silence, in its stone, in the spirits of those who lived and died there. We do not speak of singing. If there is singing, it is not ours. The absence of Apache oral tradition on the subject has led some researchers to speculate that the phenomenon is of more recent origin, perhaps connected to the military presence in the region during the 19th and 20th centuries, or to some unrecorded event involving settlers or missionaries. But no record of missionary activity at Cochise Stronghold has ever been found. The canyon was too remote, too dangerous during the Apache Wars, too inaccessible for any sustained religious presence. Others have suggested natural explanations: wind passing through rock formations, acoustic anomalies created by the canyon's unusual geometry, auditory hallucinations induced by isolation and darkness. None of these theories account for the consistency of the descriptions, the same time frame, the same musical characteristics, the same emotional response across more than a century of independent witnesses. The most recent documented account comes from 2021, when a wildfire evacuation forced a group of hikers to spend an unplanned night at the Stronghold campground. One member of the group, a nurse from Phoenix named Adrian Kimura, reported hearing what sounded like a church choir at approximately 2:40 in the morning. "I grew up singing in choirs," Kimura said in a social media post that was later archived by a researcher collecting contemporary accounts. "I know what choral music sounds like." This was choral music, harmonized voices, clearly human, clearly intentional. But the language was wrong. Not wrong like a foreign language, wrong like it was almost a language, like it was trying to be words but couldn't quite get there. Kimura attempted to record the music on her phone. The recording captured only static. "I played it back afterward and there was nothing, just hiss. But I heard it. I know I heard it. And the strangest thing was, I wasn't scared. I was sad. I felt like I had lost something, or was about to lose something. Like the music was mourning something that hadn't happened yet." Kochi Stronghold remains a popular destination for hikers and campers. The Forest Service maintains the campground, which operates on a first-come, first-served basis. There are no interpretive signs mentioning the singing. Rangers do not discuss it with visitors. The grave of Cochise has never been found. The warriors who buried him took the secret of his resting place to their own graves. The canyon keeps its silences as carefully as it keeps its sounds. Between 2 and 3 in the morning, in the deepest part of the night, the stronghold is quiet. The oaks stand motionless. The granite walls hold the darkness close. Most visitors sleep undisturbed, but sometimes, according to those who have heard it, the canyon fills with music, voices raised in harmony, singing something that sounds almost like a hymn, in a language that sounds almost like words, carrying a sorrow that feels almost like memory. The recordings capture nothing. The Apache claim no knowledge. The singers, whoever they are, have never been seen. They continue to sing, and the canyon continues to listen. Earl Denton walked into the desert on a Tuesday morning and came back 11 days later, unchanged in every way except the ones that mattered. The Denton family had ranched a 3,000-acre parcel along the western edge of the Chiricahua foothills since 1908, when Earl's grandfather Silas purchased the land from a mining company that had failed to find silver in the volcanic rock. The property was hard-scrabble country, mesquite flats giving way to oak-studded hills, seasonal washes that ran dry by May and flooded without warning during monsoon season. It was not easy land, but the Dentons had made it work for 3 generations. Earl was 47 years old in the summer of 1974. He had inherited the ranch from his father in 1962 and run it with his wife, Lorraine, ever since. They had 2 children, a son named Thomas, then 21, and studying agriculture at the University of Arizona, and a daughter named Patricia, 18, and preparing to leave for nursing school in Tucson. The family was known in the community as quiet, reliable, hard-working. Earl served on the board of the local Cattlemen's Association. Lorraine taught Sunday school at the Methodist Church in Wilcox. On the morning of July 9, 1974, Earl told Lorraine he was going to check the eastern fence line, where he had noticed signs of javelina damage the previous week. He took his usual equipment, a canteen, a fencing tool, a .30-30 rifle in case of snakes or predators, and left on horseback around 7:30. He expected to be back by noon. He did not return. Lorraine began to worry around 2 o'clock when Earl missed lunch. By 5, she had driven to the eastern fence line herself and found his horse standing alone near a damaged section of wire, still saddled, grazing on bunch grass. Earl's canteen hung from the saddle horn. His rifle was in its scabbard. His hat lay on the ground nearby, as if it had fallen or been placed there. There was no sign of Earl himself. The Cochise County Sheriff's Department initiated a search the following morning. Deputies on horseback covered the immediate area, while volunteers from neighboring ranches expanded the perimeter. A Civil Air Patrol aircraft flew grid patterns over the foothills. Tracking dogs were brought in from Tucson on July 11th. The search continued for 9 days. More than 150 volunteers participated at various points, covering an estimated 200 square miles of terrain. The trackers found no footprints leading away from the location where the horse had been found. The dogs picked up no scent beyond the immediate area. It was as if Earl Denton had simply ceased to exist at that spot, leaving behind his horse, his supplies, and his hat, but nothing else. On July 18th, the sheriff officially downgraded the search to recovery status, a designation indicating that the missing person was presumed dead. Lorraine Denton was notified that afternoon. She reportedly received the news without visible emotion, thanked the deputy, and asked to be left alone. The following morning, July 19th, Earl Denton walked up the driveway to his home. Thomas Denton was the first to see his father. He had driven down from Tucson 2 days earlier to support his mother and was sitting on the front porch when Earl appeared at the end of the gravel drive, walking slowly but steadily toward the house. Thomas later described the moment to investigators. "I didn't recognize him at first, not because he looked different. He looked exactly the same. Same clothes, same boots, same way of walking. But something about seeing him there, after we'd spent a week and a half thinking he was dead, it didn't feel real. It felt like I was watching a movie of my father, not my actual father." Thomas called for his mother, who emerged from the house and stopped on the porch steps. According to both accounts, she did not run to her husband, did not cry out, did not embrace him when he reached the house. She simply stood and watched as he climbed the steps, removed his boots on the porch as he always did, and walked inside. "Where have you been?" she asked. Earl looked at her with what Thomas described as genuine confusion. "Checking the fence," he said. "I told you this morning." It was not morning. It was 10:47 a.m. on July 19th, 11 days after Earl had left to check the fence. But according to Earl Denton, he had been gone for only a few hours. The sheriff's department sent a deputy to interview Earl that afternoon. The deputy, a man named Hector Ruiz, had participated in the search and was familiar with the case. His report, filed July 20th, documents a conversation that lasted approximately 90 minutes. Earl was cooperative but unable to provide any useful information. He stated that he had ridden to the eastern fence line, dismounted to inspect the damage, and noticed what he described as a kind of shimmer in the air near a large boulder approximately 50 yards from the fence. He walked toward the shimmer to see what it was. The next thing he remembered was walking up his driveway. "I asked him what he meant by shimmer," Ruiz wrote in his report. "He said it looked like heat rising off pavement, but more defined, more intentional, like it had a shape. He couldn't describe the shape." Earl had no memory of the intervening 11 days. He did not recall being hungry, thirsty, tired, or in distress. He did not recall encountering anyone or anything. He did not recall sleeping. He did not recall the passage of time. From his perspective, he had walked toward a shimmer in the air and immediately found himself walking home. A medical examination conducted in Wilcox on July 21st found Earl to be in excellent health. He showed no signs of dehydration, malnutrition, exposure, or injury. His weight was unchanged from his last recorded measurement. His clothing was clean and undamaged. The deputy noted in his report that Earl's boots showed wear consistent with a single day of walking, not 11 days of travel across rough terrain. The case was closed on July 25th, classified as unexplained, with a notation that the subject had returned safely and no evidence of criminal activity had been found. The Denton family did not discuss the incident publicly. Neighbors and friends who inquired were politely deflected. Thomas returned to Tucson to complete his degree. Patricia left for nursing school as planned. Lorraine resumed her Sunday school teaching. Life continued, but those close to the family noticed changes. Margaret Kowalski, a neighbor whose property adjoined the Denton ranch, observed that Earl no longer rode to the eastern portion of his land. He used to check that fence line every week, she said, in an interview conducted in 2006. After he came back, he never went there again. He hired hands to do it. He wouldn't even drive in that direction if he could help it. More striking was Earl's apparent aversion to the Chiricahua Mountains themselves. The ranch house faced east toward the foothills, as it had since Silas Denton built it in 1912. The view was considered one of the property's finest features, the rugged peaks visible on clear days, the sunrises spectacular. After July 1974, Earl rearranged the furniture in the main room so that no seat faced the windows. He installed curtains, something the house had never had, and kept them drawn from dawn to dusk. When sitting on the porch, he positioned his chair to face north or south, never east. I asked him about it once, Margaret recalled. I said, "Earl, why don't you ever look at those beautiful mountains anymore?" He didn't answer for a long time. Then he said, "Because they're looking back." That was all. He wouldn't explain what he meant. The clocks were another matter. Within weeks of Earl's return, Lorraine noticed that the clocks in the house were running slow. Not dramatically, just a few minutes behind. She adjusted them, but they fell behind again. She replaced the batteries, then replaced the clocks themselves. The new clocks ran slow as well. Thomas, visiting for Thanksgiving in 1974, confirmed the phenomenon. Every clock in the house was exactly 4 minutes behind. The kitchen clock, the alarm clocks in the bedrooms, even my father's wristwatch. I synchronized them with the radio time signal myself. Within 24 hours, they were 4 minutes slow again. A jeweler in Wilcox examined Earl's wristwatch and found nothing mechanically wrong with it. An electrician inspected the house's wiring and found no irregularities that would affect electric clocks. The battery-operated clocks ran slow at the same rate as the electric ones. The family eventually stopped trying to correct the time. They simply lived 4 minutes behind the rest of the world. "My mother used to say it was like we were living in a different time zone," Patricia told an interviewer in 2012. "Just us, just that house. 4 minutes in the past or the future, she was never sure which." Earl Denton died in 1991 at the age of 64 from a heart attack suffered while working in the barn. Lorraine found him in the early afternoon, sitting against a hay bale, already gone. The paramedics who responded noted the time of death as approximately 12:20 p.m. When Lorraine returned to the house after the ambulance left, she looked at the kitchen clock. It read 12:16. She told Patricia about it years later. "She said that was the moment she knew," Patricia recalled. "All those years, the clock's running slow, and my father died exactly 4 minutes before the rest of the world caught up. Like he'd been living on borrowed time since 1974, like those 11 days had finally come due." Lorraine Denton sold the ranch in 1993 and moved to Tucson to be near her daughter. She never spoke publicly about her husband's disappearance or the years that followed. She died in 2008, taking whatever she knew or suspected with her. The ranch has changed hands twice since then. The current owners, who purchased the property in 2017, report nothing unusual. The clocks run normally. The curtains have been removed. The view of the Chiricahuas is visible from every room. But the boulder Earl Denton walked toward on July 9, 1974, the one near the eastern fence line, where he saw something shimmer in the desert air, still stands where it has always stood. Ranchers who work that section of land report that cattle avoid it, grazing in wide arcs that never bring them within 50 yards of its shadow. No one has investigated why. No one has asked what Earl Denton saw when he walked toward the shimmer, or where he went for 11 days, or what sent him back with clean clothes and a full stomach and a gap in his memory that lasted the rest of his life. The desert keeps its secrets. The mountains look back. And somewhere in the foothills of the Chiricahuas, 4 minutes may still be missing from the world. The canyon knows what you are going to say, and it does not want you to finish. Echo Canyon cuts through the heart of Chiricahua National Monument, a winding corridor of rhyolite hoodoos and balanced rocks that draws hikers from around the world. The formations here are among the most dramatic in the monument, towering columns rising 80 feet or more, precariously balanced stones that appear ready to topple at the slightest touch, natural archways framing views of the Sulphur Springs Valley far below. The canyon takes its name from the acoustic properties created by these rock walls, which bounce sound in patterns that delight visitors and frustrate physicists in equal measure. The echo is one of the monument's most popular attractions. Rangers mention it during interpretive talks. Trail guides recommend stopping at specific points to test the phenomenon. Visitors clap their hands, shout their names, and listen as the canyon returns their sounds, sometimes once, sometimes multiple times, the repetitions overlapping and fading in ways that seem to shift depending on where you stand and how the wind is blowing. The echo behaves normally for almost everyone. Almost. The first documented anomaly appears in a visitor log entry from October of 1953. The entry was written by a woman named Gladys Pemberton, a retired English teacher from Albuquerque who had driven to the monument with her sister for a weekend of hiking. Her account, preserved in the monument's administrative archives, is brief but specific. Tested the echo at the point marked on the trail map, called out hello and heard hello Gladys before I had finished speaking, did not give my name, left immediately, will not return. The ranger who processed the entry made a notation in the margin. Visitor possibly confused by overlapping echoes. Common occurrence. No follow-up was conducted. Similar accounts surfaced over the following decades, though they were rarely recorded in official channels. Most appeared in personal letters, trip journals, or informal conversations that were later recounted to researchers investigating acoustic anomalies in the Southwest. A geologist named Franklin Okonkwo, conducting fieldwork in the monument in 1967, mentioned the phenomenon in a letter to a colleague at the University of Texas. "The echo here is remarkable," he wrote, "but there is something else. On 2 occasions I have heard my words returned to me before I completed them. The first time, I assumed it was a trick of the acoustics. Perhaps the canyon was returning an earlier utterance that I had forgotten. The second time, I was certain. I began to say, 'The formations here are,' and heard, 'The formations here are unlike anything I have seen,' before I could finish the thought. Those were the words I intended to say. I had not spoken them yet." Okonkwo did not report the experience to park staff. He completed his field work and left the monument without returning to Echo Canyon. The accounts share certain characteristics that distinguish them from ordinary echo phenomena. In each case, the witness was alone. No documented instance of the anticipatory echo has occurred when 2 or more people were present. In each case, the returned sound was not simply a repetition of what had been spoken, but a completion of an unfinished sentence, the exact words the speaker intended to say but had not yet uttered. In each case, the witness described an immediate and overwhelming compulsion to stop speaking and leave the canyon. This compulsion was not experienced as fear exactly, but as something closer to wrongness, a visceral sense that continuing to speak would be a mistake. And in each case, the witness never returned to Echo Canyon, not once, not ever. Dr. Rosalind Whitehawk, an acoustic physicist at Northern Arizona University, reviewed the available accounts in 1994 as part of a broader study of unusual sound phenomena in the Colorado Plateau region. Her analysis, never formally published, raised more questions than it answered. The acoustic properties of Echo Canyon are well understood, she wrote in her research notes. The rock walls create reflection patterns that can produce multiple overlapping echoes, sometimes with significant delay. Under certain atmospheric conditions, these reflections can appear to precede the original sound due to constructive interference patterns. However, this does not explain reports of the echo containing words the speaker had not yet spoken. That would require the canyon to somehow anticipate the speaker's intentions, which is, by any physical model we have, impossible. Whitehawk visited Echo Canyon herself in March of 1995. She brought recording equipment, a sound level meter, and a detailed protocol for testing the acoustic properties at various points along the trail. Her equipment captured nothing unusual. The echoes behaved exactly as predicted by her models: delayed, attenuated, perfectly normal. She returned to her car that afternoon and drove back to Flagstaff. In her notes, she made one final entry. Spent 4 hours in Echo Canyon. Echo behaved normally, did not speak aloud after the first hour, did not feel comfortable speaking, cannot explain why. She did not elaborate. She did not return to the monument. When contacted by a journalist in 2008, she declined to discuss her research. The most detailed account of the phenomenon comes from a backpacker named Jerome Whitfield, who encountered the anticipatory echo in August of 2002. Whitfield, then 34 years old, was an experienced hiker who had visited Chiricahua National Monument several times. He was familiar with Echo Canyon and had tested the echo on previous trips without incident. On August 17th, he entered the canyon alone around 4 in the afternoon, intending to photograph the formations in the golden light of the late-day sun. He stopped at a point approximately halfway through the canyon, where a natural amphitheater of rock walls creates particularly strong acoustic reflections. He had tested the echo there before. He raised his hand to his mouth and began to call out. "I was going to say testing 1, 2, 3, he wrote in a detailed account posted to an online hiking forum in 2004. Standard echo test. I got as far as test and heard my own voice say, testing 1, 2, 3. Jerome, you should not be here. Clear as day. My exact voice, my exact inflection, words I had not spoken and had no intention of speaking." Whitfield described what happened next with clinical precision. "I felt something I can only describe as a kind of pressure, not physical, emotional. A sense that I had done something wrong by speaking, that I had started a process that should not have been started. The canyon was waiting for me to continue. I could feel it waiting, and I knew, I cannot explain how I knew, that if I said anything else, something would answer. Something that was not an echo." Whitfield left the canyon immediately. He did not run, but he walked faster than he had ever walked on a trail, reaching the parking area in less than 20 minutes, a distance that normally took 40. He has not returned to Chiricahua National Monument. In response to a follow-up question on the forum, he explained, "It's not that I'm afraid to go back, it's that I physically cannot. I've tried twice. Both times, I got within a mile of the monument boundary and had to turn around. My body refused to go further. It was like trying to push 2 magnets together at the same pole. I don't understand it. I don't want to understand it." Attempts to systematically study the phenomenon have been unsuccessful. In 2011, a graduate student in cognitive psychology named Yuki Tanaka designed an experiment to test whether the anticipatory echo could be reliably produced. She recruited 12 volunteers, each of whom agreed to visit Echo Canyon alone, speak a predetermined phrase, and record their experience. All 12 volunteers completed the protocol. All 12 reported normal echo behavior. None experienced the anticipatory phenomenon. Tanaka herself served as the 13th subject. Her recording device captured a normal echo delayed by approximately 1.2 seconds, matching the acoustic properties predicted by Dr. Whitehawk's 1994 models. But when Tanaka reviewed her notes that evening, she found something she did not remember writing. At the bottom of the page, in her own handwriting, was a single sentence: "It knows when you are testing it." She had no memory of writing the words. She could not explain what they meant. She submitted her thesis on a different topic and did not pursue further research into acoustic anomalies. The National Park Service has no official position on the anticipatory echo. Rangers at Chiricahua National Monument are not briefed on the phenomenon and do not discuss it with visitors. The trail guides make no mention of anything unusual. The echo remains a popular attraction, tested by thousands of visitors each year, almost all of whom experience nothing out of the ordinary. The handful of accounts that exist, fewer than a dozen across 7 decades, sit in archives, in personal correspondence, in the dim corners of online forums where people share experiences they cannot explain. The witnesses do not know each other. They have never met. They have nothing in common except a moment in Echo Canyon when the rocks returned words that had not yet been spoken. None of them can explain what happened. None of them have tried to replicate the experience. None of them have returned. The canyon remains. The formations stand as they have stood for 27 million years, shaped by wind and water and the slow pressure of time. The echo still works, bouncing sound from wall to wall, returning voices to those who call out, obeying the laws of physics that govern reflection and delay, except when it doesn't. Except when it answers too soon. Except when it knows what you are going to say before you say it, and speaks the words back to you with your own voice and waits to see if you are foolish enough to continue the conversation. The witnesses stopped talking. They walked away. They never came back. Perhaps they understood something the canyon wanted them to understand, or perhaps they simply heard, in that premature echo, a warning they were wise enough to heed, a voice that sounded exactly like their own, telling them something they had not yet realized they needed to know. The fire consumed everything around those trees, but the trees themselves burned in the wrong direction. The Horseshoe 2 fire ignited on May 8, 2011, sparked by a downed power line in the Chiricahua Mountains, near the town of Portal. Driven by drought conditions and sustained winds, the fire spread rapidly through the high-elevation forests of the Coronado National Forest, eventually burning more than 222,000 acres across both Arizona and New Mexico. It was, at the time, the second largest wildfire in Arizona history. The fire burned for 47 days, consuming stands of Apache pine, Douglas fir, and Engelmann spruce that had grown undisturbed for centuries. Entire drainages were reduced to moonscapes of ash and blackened trunks. The damage to the Chiricahua ecosystem was catastrophic. Watershed destabilization, habitat destruction, erosion that would take decades to heal. Recovery teams spent months assessing the scope of the devastation. It was during one of these assessment surveys, in late August of 2011, that a Forest Service botanist named Clara Redhorse discovered the anomaly near Fly Peak. Fly Peak rises to an elevation of 9,666 feet, one of the highest points in the Chiricahua Range. The fire had swept through the surrounding terrain with particular intensity, driven upslope by afternoon winds that pushed flames through the dense conifer forest. Satellite imagery from June showed the area around the peak as a continuous burn scar with no visible breaks in the destruction. But when Red Horse hiked into the drainage northwest of the peak on August 23rd, she found something the satellites had missed. The stand consisted of 11 ponderosa pines, clustered in a rough circle approximately 40 meters in diameter. The trees were mature. Red Horse estimated their age at between 120 and 150 years based on their size, and they were completely unburned. Around them, in every direction, the forest was destroyed. Charred trunks stood like blackened pillars. Ash covered the ground in drifts several inches deep. The fire had burned so hot in places that the soil itself was sterilized, the organic layer completely consumed. The devastation extended to within 3 meters of the outermost trees in the stand, and then it stopped. The pines showed no external fire damage. Their bark was intact. Their needles, though drought-stressed, were green. The ground beneath them was covered in normal duff, fallen needles, decomposing cones, the ordinary detritus of a healthy forest floor. There was no ash, no scorching, no indication that fire had come anywhere near them. Red Horse documented the site with photographs and GPS coordinates, then returned to the ranger station to report her findings. Her initial assessment suggested a fire refugium, a pocket of terrain that escaped burning due to local topography, moisture conditions, or wind patterns. Such refugia are not uncommon in large fires and often serve as seed sources for post-fire regeneration. But subsequent analysis revealed that the Fly Peak stand was not a refugium. A team of fire ecologists from the Rocky Mountain Research Station arrived in September to study the site. Their investigation, led by a fire behavior specialist named Dr. Marcus Youngblood, employed a range of techniques: soil core sampling, aerial thermal imaging, and dendrochronological analysis of the trees themselves. The soil data showed no evidence of fire suppression. The duff layer beneath the pines was not unusually moist, not protected by any obvious barrier, not chemically treated. There was no reason, based on fuel load and terrain analysis, why the fire should have spared this particular stand. The thermal imaging was inconclusive but troubling. Residual heat signatures in the soil around the stand were consistent with an intense surface fire, temperatures exceeding 800 degrees Fahrenheit in places. But within the stand, the thermal profile dropped sharply, as if an invisible wall had blocked the heat transfer. It was the dendrochronological analysis that produced the most disturbing results. Tree cores were extracted from 4 of the 11 pines, a standard procedure that removes a narrow cylinder of wood from the trunk, allowing researchers to examine growth rings without killing the tree. The cores were analyzed at the University of Arizona's Laboratory of Tree Ring Research, one of the foremost dendrochronology facilities in the world. The outermost rings, those corresponding to the years 2008 through 2011, showed normal growth patterns. No scarring, no cellular damage, no evidence of heat stress. But the inner rings told a different story. Beginning at approximately the 35th ring from the bark, corresponding to roughly 1976, the wood showed clear evidence of thermal damage. The cell walls were distorted in patterns consistent with extreme heat exposure. The resin canals were disrupted. The coloration was darker than the surrounding tissue, suggesting chemical changes associated with partial carbonization. The damage intensified toward the center of the tree. By the 50th ring, approximately 1961, the wood was severely compromised, the cellular structure barely recognizable. At the very center, in rings corresponding to the late 1880s and early 1900s, the damage was catastrophic. The wood was effectively charcoal. The pattern was consistent across all 4 sampled trees. Dr. Elena Vasquez, the dendrochronologist who led the analysis, included a single line in her preliminary report that the Forest Service later redacted from public documents. The thermal damage profile is inverted. The trees appear to have burned from the inside out. In a healthy tree, fire damage appears on the outer rings first, where the bark fails to protect the cambium from external heat. In extreme cases, damage may penetrate inward, but it always originates at the exterior. The fly peak pines showed the opposite pattern, damage originating at the core and radiating outward, diminishing in intensity as it approached the bark, and disappearing entirely in the most recent growth. The trees had survived a fire that had not yet reached them, or they had survived a fire that had burned in reverse. The research team could not explain the findings. Dr. Youngblood submitted a request for additional funding to conduct more extensive analysis, including carbon dating of the charred inner wood and comparison with fire-scarred trees from elsewhere in the Chiricahuas. The request was denied. The stated reason was resource constraints due to ongoing fire recovery operations. The actual reason, according to a Forest Service employee who spoke anonymously to a journalist in 2014, was that nobody wanted to deal with what those trees implied. The Fly Peak stand was designated a sensitive ecological area in October of 2011. A closure order was issued, prohibiting public access within a quarter-mile radius of the site. The official justification cited ongoing research and monitoring requirements. No research has been conducted there since 2012. The closure order was renewed in 2014, 2017, and 2020. It remains in effect. Satellite imagery from 2019 shows the stand still intact, a small circle of green amid the slowly recovering burn scar. The surrounding forest has begun to regenerate, aspens sprouting from root systems, oak scrub reclaiming the slopes. But the pines near Fly Peak remain isolated, unchanged, apparently unaffected by the passage of time. Two former members of the research team have spoken about the Fly Peak pines in the years since the investigation was closed. Dr. Vasquez, now retired from the Laboratory of Tree Ring Research, gave a brief interview to a documentary filmmaker in 2018. She declined to discuss her findings in detail, but offered one observation. In 30 years of studying tree rings, I have never seen anything like those cores. The damage was real. The thermal signatures were unmistakable. But the chronology was impossible. Fire does not burn backward through time. Wood does not char from the inside before the outside. Those trees experienced something that our models cannot account for. I do not know what it was. I am not certain I want to know. Dr. Youngblood, still employed by the Rocky Mountain Research Station, has refused all interview requests. A colleague who worked with him on the Fly Peak assessment said only that Youngblood does not discuss the case and has declined invitations to revisit the site. He told me once that he dreams about those trees, the colleague said. He said in the dreams, the fire is still burning, but it's burning backward, year by year, ring by ring, undoing everything the forest ever was. He said he wakes up and can smell smoke, even though there's nothing burning. He's requested transfers 3 times since 2012. He doesn't want to work in the Chiricahuas anymore. The Chiricahua Mountains have recovered substantially from the Horseshoe 2 fire. The trails have reopened. The campgrounds are operational. Visitors hike through landscapes that bear the scars of devastation, but also the signs of renewal, wildflowers in the meadows, saplings on the slopes, life returning to land that was, for a time, reduced to ash. Near Fly Peak, the closure signs remain posted. The trails that once passed near the summit have been rerouted. Rangers do not discuss the restricted area with visitors. The official line is that the site is being monitored for post-fire recovery purposes, a designation that explains nothing and invites no further questions. The 11 pines still stand. Their bark is intact. Their needles are green. They cast shadows on ground that should have burned but didn't, surrounded by a forest that died while they somehow survived. Inside their trunks, in rings laid down before any living person can remember, the wood is black. The cells are charred. The damage is old, older than the fire that should have caused it, older than the tree's own memory of growth. The fire came in 2011. The burning started decades before. No one can explain how a tree can burn from the inside out, from the past toward the present, from the center of its being, toward a future that has not yet arrived. No one can explain how 11 pines survived a fire that destroyed everything around them while carrying evidence of a fire that burned in the wrong direction through time. The Forest Service does not try to explain it. They simply keep the area closed, renew the permits, and hope that whatever happened near Fly Peak stays contained within that small circle of impossible survival. The trees continue to grow. Ring by ring, year by year, they add new wood to their outer layers, burying the charred evidence a little deeper with each passing season. In another century, the damage may be too far inside to detect without killing the trees entirely. Perhaps that is the point. Perhaps the forest is trying to forget what happened. Perhaps it is trying to make sure no one else remembers. A photograph captured something that should not exist, and no one has been able to find it since. Riggs Flat Lake sits at an elevation of 8,900 feet in the Pinaleño Mountains, approximately 50 miles northwest of the Chiricahua Range. The lake is small, roughly 11 acres, and shallow, created by an earthen dam constructed by the Civilian Conservation Corps in the 1930s. It occupies a meadow surrounded by mixed conifer forest, one of the few bodies of water in southeastern Arizona accessible by paved road. On clear days, the eastern horizon offers an unobstructed view of the Chiricahua Mountains, their jagged profile rising above the intervening valleys like the spine of some ancient creature. The lake draws fishermen in summer and leaf peepers in autumn, but it is not a heavily visited destination. The drive is long, the road narrow and winding, and the amenities limited to a small campground and a vault toilet. Most visitors come for the solitude, for the cool mountain air, for the chance to escape the desert heat that grips the valleys below. In October of 1998, a retired accountant named Howard Bergman drove to Riggs Flat Lake with his wife, Judith, for a weekend of fishing and photography. Bergman was an amateur photographer who had recently purchased his first SLR camera, a Canon EOS Rebel G, and was eager to test it in the field. He shot 3 rolls of film over the course of the weekend: landscapes, wildlife, portraits of Judith standing by the water. The photographs were developed at a 1-hour lab in Safford the following Monday. Bergman reviewed them that evening at the kitchen table, sorting the successful shots from the mediocre ones. Most were unremarkable. Competent amateur work, pleasant but unexceptional. One photograph was different. The was tourist, and the image showed the eastern horizon as seen from the northwest shore of Riggs Flat Lake. The Chiricahua Mountains were clearly visible in the distance, rendered in soft focus by atmospheric haze, but unmistakably recognizable. The foreground included a section of the lake's surface, the reflection of scattered clouds, and the dark silhouette of a Douglas fir at the frame's left edge. On a ridge in the middle distance, approximately 15 miles from the camera position by Bergman's later estimate, stood a structure. The structure appeared to be a small tower, roughly circular in plan, constructed of stacked stone. It rose perhaps 20 feet above the ridgeline, tapering slightly toward the top, where it terminated in what might have been a flat platform or a partially collapsed roof. The stone was pale, almost white, in the afternoon light, contrasting sharply with the dark vegetation of the surrounding forest. Bergman did not remember seeing the tower when he took the photograph. He had been focused on the mountains, on the interplay of light and cloud, on the technical aspects of exposure and composition. But there it was, clearly visible in the developed image, a structure that looked ancient and deliberate and entirely out of place. He showed the photograph to Judith, who was equally puzzled. Neither of them had noticed anything unusual on the horizon during their visit. Neither had ever heard of a stone tower in the Chiricahuas. Bergman made inquiries. Over the following months, Bergman contacted the Coronado National Forest, the Arizona State Historic Preservation Office, and the Cochise County Historical Society. He sent copies of the photograph to each organization, along with detailed notes about the date, time, and location of the image. The responses were consistent. No one had any record of a stone tower in the area depicted in the photograph. A forest archaeologist named Dr. Patricia Littlefeather examined the image at Bergman's request. She identified the visible ridgeline as part of the wilderness area south of Fly Peak, cross-referencing the photograph with topographical maps and aerial surveys. The coordinates she determined, approximately 31 degrees, 56 minutes north by 109 degrees 18 minutes west, corresponded to a remote section of the Chiricahua wilderness, accessible only by a strenuous cross-country hike through dense forest and steep terrain. "There's nothing in our records for that location," Littlefeather told Bergman in a letter dated February 1999. "No historic structures, no archaeological sites, no ruins of any kind. The area has been surveyed twice, once in 1964 and again in 1987. Neither survey documented anything resembling the structure in your photograph." Littlefeather offered a tentative explanation. The tower might be a natural rock formation, a hoodoo or balanced rock that happened to resemble a man-made structure when viewed from a specific angle and in specific lighting conditions. The Chiricahuas were famous for such formations. It was not impossible that one had gone unnoticed in previous surveys. Bergman was unconvinced. The structure in his photograph did not look natural. The stones appeared to be stacked, the walls too regular, the profile too symmetrical. It looked, he insisted, like something someone had built. Ostistim. In the summer of 1999, Bergman organized an expedition to find the tower. He recruited 2 hiking companions, a retired surveyor named Ed Kowalski and a wilderness guide named Roberto Mendez, and planned a 3-day trek into the area Littlefeather had identified. The hike was difficult. The terrain was steep and heavily vegetated, with no trails and few natural landmarks. The men used compass and topographical map to navigate, cross-referencing their position against the photograph at regular intervals. On the second day, they reached the ridgeline visible in the image. The view matched almost exactly, the same profile of distant peaks, the same arrangement of forest and sky. They were standing, Bergman believed, at the precise location where the tower should have been. There was nothing there. The ridge was bare rock and scattered pine, with no sign of construction, no foundation stones, no rubble, no indication that any structure had ever stood in that place. Mendez, who had experience identifying archaeological sites, examined the area thoroughly and found nothing. No tool marks, no quarried stone, no evidence of human activity whatsoever. They spent the afternoon searching the surrounding terrain, expanding their radius to include adjacent ridges and drainages. By evening, they had found nothing but wilderness. "It's not here," Kowalski said as they made camp that night. "Whatever's in that photograph, it's not here." Bergman had no explanation. He had the photograph in his pack, the original print, developed by a commercial lab, showing a structure that was clearly visible on this exact ridgeline. He was standing where the tower should be. The tower was not there. Bergman returned to Riggs Flat Lake 3 more times over the following years, each time with a camera, each time photographing the same view of the eastern horizon. The tower never appeared again. His subsequent photographs showed the same mountains, the same ridges, the same interplay of light and atmosphere. The location where the tower had appeared was visible in every image, a bare ridgeline indistinguishable from hundreds of others in the Chiricahua Range. In 2003, Bergman submitted the original photograph and his accompanying documentation to the Arizona Historical Society. He included a letter explaining the circumstances of the image and his unsuccessful attempts to locate the structure. He requested that the photograph be preserved and, if possible, investigated by qualified researchers. The Historical Society acknowledged receipt of the donation but declined to conduct further research. A staff archivist noted in internal correspondence that the photograph, while intriguing, does not meet the criteria for prioritized investigation and recommended it be filed pending future interest. The photograph remains in the Society's collection, stored in an acid-free folder in a climate-controlled facility in Tempe. It has never been cataloged or digitized. Researchers who have requested access report that locating the file requires persistence and familiarity with the Society's internal filing system. It is not listed in any public database. Howard Bergman died in 2015 at the age of 78. His widow, Judith, donated his photographic equipment and personal papers to the Safford Library, where they remain in a small archive dedicated to local history. Among the papers is a journal Bergman kept during his years of investigating the photograph. The final entry, dated March 2012, summarizes his conclusions. I have spent 14 years trying to understand what I photographed at Riggs Flat Lake. I have consulted historians, archaeologists, geologists, and photographers. I have hiked to the location 3 times. I have examined the image with magnifying glasses, with digital scanning, with every tool available to an amateur investigator. I cannot explain what I saw. The tower exists in my photograph. It does not exist on the ridge where I photographed it. These 2 facts cannot both be true, and yet they are. I am left with only possibilities, none of them satisfying. Perhaps the tower was there in 1998 and has since been destroyed or removed, though there is no evidence of this, and no one has claimed responsibility. Perhaps the tower was never there, and my photograph somehow captured an image of something that does not exist in our physical world, a thought I find disturbing and prefer not to pursue. Perhaps the tower exists, but not at all times, not consistently, not reliably, not in a way that conforms to our understanding of how structures behave. I do not know which possibility is correct. I am not sure I want to know. I am 75 years old. I will not hike to that ridge again. I will not take another photograph of that view. Whatever I captured on that October afternoon, I have decided to leave it alone. Some things, I have come to believe, are not meant to be found. They are meant only to be glimpsed, once, from a distance, in a photograph that no one quite believes. The tower was real. I saw it. I have the photograph to prove it. But the photograph is all the proof there will ever be. The ridgeline south of Fly Peak remains unmarked and unremarkable on every current map. Hikers who pass through the area report nothing unusual, no ruins, no foundations, no evidence of construction, ancient or modern. The wilderness looks exactly as wilderness should look, untouched, unchanged, indifferent to human curiosity. At Riggs Flat Lake, the view of the eastern horizon is unobstructed on clear days. The Chiricahua Mountains rise in the distance, their jagged profile familiar to anyone who has studied a map of southeastern Arizona. The ridges are visible, the forests are visible. There is nothing to see that should not be seen. But in a climate-controlled archive in Tempe, a photograph waits in an uncatalogued folder, an image of mountains and sky and water, and on a distant ridge, a pale stone tower that no one has ever found, that no survey has ever documented, that exists only in one frame of film shot on an October afternoon by a man who spent the rest of his life wondering what he had seen. The photograph is real. The tower may or may not be. And somewhere in the Chiricahua wilderness, on a ridge that looks exactly like every other ridge, the space where the tower should stand remains empty or occupied by something that chooses when to be seen and when to vanish, leaving behind only questions and a single image that answers none of them. None. The data said he walked the same ground twice, but his memory insists he walked it only once. The South Fork Trail winds through the eastern drainage of Cave Creek Canyon, climbing gradually from the desert scrub of the canyon floor into the oak and pine woodlands of the Chiricahua High Country. The trail is popular with birdwatchers. The South Fork is renowned for its populations of elegant trogons and Mexican spotted owls, but it also attracts backpackers seeking access to the remote wilderness beyond. The path follows the creek for approximately 3 miles before branching into a network of unmaintained routes that penetrate deeper into the mountains. In September of 2014, a software engineer named Daniel Oyalaran spent a long weekend hiking the South Fork and its tributaries. Oyalaran was 31 years old, an experienced backcountry traveler who had logged hundreds of miles in the deserts and mountains of the Southwest. He was methodical by nature and by profession, the kind of hiker who recorded every trip with GPS data, photographs, and detailed journal entries. He arrived at the South Fork trailhead on the morning of September 12th, a Friday. His plan was straightforward: hike to a campsite near the junction of the South Fork and an unnamed tributary, spend 2 nights, and return on Sunday. He carried a 40-pound pack, a DSLR camera, and a GPS-enabled watch that recorded his position every 15 seconds throughout the hike. The first day proceeded without incident. Oyalaran reached his campsite by early afternoon, set up his tent, and spent the remaining daylight hours photographing birds and exploring the immediate area. He slept well, woke early on Saturday, and spent the morning on a day hike up the tributary before returning to camp. Sunday morning, he broke camp and began the return hike to the trailhead. It was during this return hike that the anomaly occurred. Oyalaran did not notice anything unusual during the walk itself. The trail was familiar from his ascent 2 days earlier: the same rocks, the same creek crossings, the same gradual descent through changing vegetation zones. He hiked at his usual pace, stopping occasionally to photograph interesting features or check his map. He reached the trailhead by early afternoon, loaded his gear into his car, and drove back to Tucson. That evening, he uploaded his GPS data to his computer for analysis. He had developed a habit of reviewing his tracks after each hike, comparing actual distances and elevations to his pre-trip estimates. The data usually held no surprises. This time was different. The GPS track showed the expected route: trailhead to campsite on Friday, day hike on Saturday, return to trailhead on Sunday. The total distance matched his estimate. The elevation profile was consistent with the topography. Everything appeared normal until he examined the Sunday data in detail. At a point approximately 1.7 miles from the trailhead, the track showed something impossible: a half-mile segment that had been recorded twice. The segment ran along a dry stream bed where the trail crossed from the north bank to the south bank before continuing downstream. Oyalaran had walked this section on Friday without incident. On Sunday, according to his GPS, he had walked it twice, first heading southwest, then heading southwest again, covering the identical ground in the identical direction. The time stamps showed no gap between the 2 passes. The first ended at 11:43 and 17 seconds. The second began at 11:43 and 18 seconds. There was no turnaround, no backtrack, no deviation from the trail. The data simply recorded the same half-mile twice, as if time had stuttered and repeated itself. Malas. Iskasi Oyalaran initially assumed the GPS had malfunctioned. Satellite signal can be unreliable in canyon terrain, and position errors are not uncommon. He examined the data more closely, looking for the characteristic scatter of a degraded signal. There was none. The track was clean, the position fixes consistent and tightly clustered. The watch had recorded exactly what it appeared to record: 2 consecutive passages through the same half-mile of trail, 7 minutes apart, with no interruption. He turned to his photographs. Oyelaran had taken several pictures during the Sunday hike, including 2 shots of a distinctive boulder formation near the dry stream bed crossing. The formation was memorable, a large rhyolite boulder balanced on a smaller pedestal with a twisted juniper growing from a crack in its surface. He had photographed it on Friday as well, intending to compare morning and afternoon light. When he examined the Sunday photographs, he found that he had captured the boulder twice. The first image was time-stamped 11:38 a.m. The second was time-stamped 11:45 a.m. Both showed the same boulder from the same angle, with the same composition and framing. The shadows were identical. The position of a small lizard on the rock's surface was identical. The twist of the juniper's branches was identical. The photographs appeared to be duplicates, except they had been taken 7 minutes apart. Oyelaran checked the camera's internal clock against his GPS watch. They were synchronized to within 2 seconds. The timestamps were accurate. He had taken 2 photographs of the same boulder from the same position at 2 different times, and the boulder, the shadows, and even the lizard had not moved at all. Oyelaran discussed the incident with a friend, a physicist named Kenji Nakamura, who taught at the University of Arizona. Nakamura examined the GPS data, the photographs, and the camera's metadata. His analysis, conducted over several evenings in Oyelaran's apartment, eliminated most conventional explanations. The GPS data showed no evidence of signal reflection, multipath error, or satellite geometry problems. The position fixes were consistent with a receiver operating under optimal conditions. The duplicate segment was not an artifact of post-processing. It appeared in the raw data downloaded directly from the watch. The photographs showed no evidence of tampering or editing. The metadata was internally consistent. The XCF data recorded the camera's settings, which were slightly different between the 2 shots. A minor adjustment to exposure compensation that Oyelaran did not remember making, but which confirmed the images were captured separately. "I can tell you what the data shows," Nakamura said. "It shows you walked the same half-mile twice, 7 minutes apart, without stopping or turning around. It shows you took 2 photographs of the same scene, 7 minutes apart, with no change in the scene. What I cannot tell you is how any of that is possible." Oyelaran had no memory of stopping, turning around, or retracing his steps. He remembered the hike as continuous and unremarkable, a straightforward descent from campsite to trailhead. He did not remember taking 2 photographs of the boulder. He did not remember walking the stream bed crossing twice. "It felt like any other hike," he said in a written account he later posted to a hiking forum. "I wasn't disoriented. I wasn't confused. I didn't lose time, at least not in any way I was aware of. According to my own experience, I walked that trail once, took 1 photograph of that boulder, and continued to the trailhead. According to my data, I did something else entirely." In the months following the hike, Oyelaran made 2 attempts to return to the South Fork Trail and recreate the conditions of his September trip. Both attempts were unsuccessful. The first, in November of 2014, was cut short by an early winter storm that made the upper trail impassable. The second, in April of 2015, proceeded without incident. Oyelaran hiked the entire route, including the stream bed crossing, and recorded clean GPS data with no anomalies. The photographs he took showed normal variation in light and shadow, nothing repeated. He returned to the exact location where the duplicate segment had been recorded. He stood at the stream bed crossing, looking for anything unusual, a landmark, a formation, a feature that might explain what had happened. He found nothing. The terrain was ordinary, indistinguishable from hundreds of similar crossings throughout the Chiricahuas. I spent probably an hour there, he wrote, walking back and forth, checking my GPS, waiting for something to happen. Nothing did. It was just a dry stream bed and a trail and some rocks. Whatever occurred in September wasn't occurring in April. Maybe it only happens once. Maybe it happens all the time and we just don't notice. I have no way of knowing. Oyalaran posted his account, including the GPS data and photographs, to several online communities dedicated to unexplained phenomena. The responses ranged from skeptical dismissal to elaborate theories involving temporal anomalies, parallel dimensions, and government experiments. None provided a satisfactory explanation. A statistician who analyzed the data at Oyalaran's request noted one detail that had escaped initial notice. The duplicate segment was not a perfect copy. The GPS positions differed by an average of 1.3 meters between the two passes, consistent with the normal variation expected from satellite positioning. If the data had been fabricated or corrupted, the positions would likely have been identical. The slight variation suggested that the watch had genuinely recorded two separate traversals of the same terrain. Your GPS thinks you walked that section twice, the statistician wrote, and it recorded slightly different positions each time, which is exactly what you'd expect if you actually did walk it twice. The data is behaving as if the event was real. Oyalaran has not returned to the South Fork Trail since 2015. His GPS watch, a Garmin Fenix 2, remains in working order. He has used it on dozens of subsequent hikes without incident. The September 2014 data file remains on his computer, unchanged since the day he downloaded it. In a follow-up post written in 2018, Oyalaran reflected on the experience. I've thought about this for 4 years now. I've read everything I can find about GPS errors, time perception, memory formation, all of it. None of it explains what happened. The simplest interpretation is that the data is wrong, that something glitched in a way I can't identify, and the duplicate segment is just an artifact. But the photographs bother me. I took 2 pictures of that boulder, 7 minutes apart, and nothing changed. Not the shadows, not the lizard, not the angle of the light. In 7 minutes, the sun should have moved. The lizard should have moved. Something should have been different, unless those 7 minutes didn't pass the way 7 minutes are supposed to pass, unless I walked that half mile, and then I walked it again, and the world held still while I did. I don't believe in the supernatural. I don't believe in time loops or dimensional rifts, or any of that. But I also don't have an explanation for what my own equipment recorded, so I'm left with the data, and the photographs, and a memory of a hike that felt completely ordinary, a hike that, according to every instrument I carried, was anything but. The South Fork Trail remains open to hikers year-round. The streambed crossing where the anomaly occurred is unmarked, indistinguishable from the terrain around it. Thousands of hikers pass through the area each year, recording their journeys with GPS devices and smartphone apps, generating terabytes of positional data. None have reported a similar phenomenon. Daniel Oyalaran's data file sits on a hard drive in Tucson, a string of coordinates that trace a path through the Chiricahua Mountains, a path that, for reasons no one can explain, folded back on itself for half a mile on a September morning, recording the same ground twice, while the hiker who walked it noticed nothing at all. The rocks are still there. The dry stream bed still crosses the trail. The juniper still grows from the crack in the balanced boulder. And somewhere in the data, 7 minutes remain unaccounted for, 7 minutes when the world may have repeated itself, or when a man walked through a place that exists twice, or when something happened that leaves no trace except the silent testimony of satellites and sensors that recorded what they were designed to record. The man walked the same mile twice. He only remembers walking it once. The data remembers differently. The laughter has echoed through Apache Pass for longer than anyone can remember, and no one has ever found the children who make it. Apache Pass cuts through the Dos Cabezas Mountains at an elevation of 5,100 feet, a narrow corridor of rock and scrub that has served as a critical route between the San Simon Valley and the Sulphur Springs Valley for thousands of years. The Chiricahua Apache knew the pass intimately. It provided access to the spring at Apache Spring, one of the only reliable water sources in 100 miles of desert. Spanish explorers passed through in the 17th century. American military expeditions followed in the 19th. The Butterfield Overland Mail established a station here in 1858, and Fort Bowie was constructed nearby in 1862 to protect travelers from Apache raids during 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 1862, 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 the wars that would rage for another quarter century. The pass has seen violence, hardship, and death. It has also seen something else, something that defies the weight of its history. Children laughing, not the laughter of grief or memory, not the echo of past events imprinted on the landscape. Something else entirely, the sound of children at play, heard by travelers who pass through alone, fading the moment anyone tries to find its source. The earliest documented account appears in the diary of a Butterfield stage driver named Cornelius Whitmore, who made regular runs through Apache Pass between 1859 and 1861. His entry for March 17, 1860, describes an encounter that would be repeated in various forms for more than a century and a half. Stopped to water the horses at the spring, heard children playing somewhere up the rocks, laughing and calling to each other. Thought perhaps a family had camped nearby, though I had seen no wagons. Walked toward the sound but could not locate its source. The laughter seemed always just ahead, just around the next boulder, just beyond the next rise. After perhaps 10 minutes, I abandoned the search and returned to the stage. The passengers had heard nothing. The laughter continued until we departed. Whitmore's diary contains 2 additional references to the phenomenon, both from later trips through the pass. In each case, the details are consistent. Laughter heard while alone or separated from companions, impossible to locate, ceasing when the search was abandoned or when others approached. Stagecoach drivers who worked the Butterfield route developed a name for the phenomenon. They called Apache Pass the Pass That Plays, a phrase that appears in several letters and journals from the period. The name was not recorded in any official capacity, and it faded from use after the Butterfield line was discontinued in 1861, but the laughter did not fade with it. Military records from Fort Bowie contain scattered references to unexplained sounds in the pass, though the accounts are typically brief and dismissive. A sergeant named William Reyes noted in an 1874 patrol report that his men had heard what sounded like children's voices near the old stage station, but attributed the sound to wind through the rocks or some similar natural cause. An 1882 inspection report mentions that sentries posted at the eastern approach to the pass had complained of auditory disturbances that interfered with their ability to detect approaching travelers. The fort was abandoned in 1894, and for several decades the pass saw little traffic. The railroad had rendered the overland route obsolete, and the spring that had drawn travelers for millennia was no longer a critical waypoint. Apache Pass became a backwater visited only by ranchers, prospectors, and the occasional historian interested in the ruins of Fort Bowie. The laughter continued. A rancher named Esteban Morales, whose family grazed cattle in the San Simon Valley, reported hearing children in the pass on at least 4 occasions between 1908 and 1923. His account, recorded by a WPA interviewer in 1936, describes the phenomenon with weary familiarity. Everyone who spends time in the pass hears them eventually, the children. You hear them laughing, playing some game you cannot see. You look for them the first time you always look, and you find nothing. After a while, you stop looking. You just let them play. They don't bother anyone, they just laugh. When asked who the children were, Morales shrugged. Nobody knows. The old-timers say they've always been there. Before the fort, before the stage, before the Americans. Maybe before the Apache. The pass has children. That's just how it is. The most detailed investigation of the phenomenon was conducted in 1978 by Dr. Roland Nakashima, an acoustics researcher from the University of Arizona who had read about the reports while researching sound propagation in canyon environments. Nakashima spent 3 weeks in Apache Pass with recording equipment, attempting to capture and analyze the sounds that travelers had described for more than a century. His recordings captured nothing unusual: wind noise, bird calls, the occasional vehicle on the distant highway, but no children's voices, no laughter, no unexplained sounds of any kind. Nakashima was preparing to conclude his study when he heard the laughter himself. It was late afternoon on his final day in the field. He had packed most of his equipment and was walking back to his vehicle when he heard it, children laughing, somewhere to his left, among the boulders that lined the northern slope of the pass. The sound was clear, unmistakable, and close. He estimated the source at no more than 50 meters. He walked toward it. The laughter continued, seeming to stay just ahead of him, never growing louder or fainter, regardless of his movement. He searched for approximately 15 minutes before returning to his vehicle. The laughter had stopped by then, replaced by the ordinary silence of the desert. His recording equipment, still running in his vehicle, had captured nothing. "I cannot explain what I heard," Nakashima wrote in his unpublished field notes. The sound was clear and distinct. It was not wind, it was not wildlife, it was children laughing. But my equipment, which was sensitive enough to capture a whispered conversation at 200 meters, recorded only ambient noise. Either the sound exists at a frequency my equipment cannot detect, or it exists in a way that recording equipment cannot capture. Neither explanation is satisfying. Nakashima's research was never published. He died in 1992, and his field notes were donated to the University Library, where they remain in an uncatalogued collection of personal papers. The Chiricahua Apache, whose ancestors lived in and around Apache Pass for centuries, have no recorded oral tradition describing children's voices in the pass. Elders consulted by researchers in the 1980s and 1990s uniformly stated that the phenomenon was unfamiliar to them. "We know the pass," one elder told an anthropologist in 1987. "We know its spirits, its dangers, its gifts. We do not know these children. If they are there, they are not ours. They came from somewhere else, or they belong to no one." The absence of Apache oral tradition has led some researchers to speculate that the phenomenon is relatively recent, perhaps originating in the 19th century during the period of military conflict and civilian travel through the pass. Others have suggested that the Apache knew of the phenomenon but chose not to speak of it to outsiders. A third possibility exists that the children's voices predate human habitation of the pass entirely, echoing through a landscape that has known their laughter longer than it has known language to describe it. The soldier's letter from 1943, the one that mentions children who do not know the war is over, has never been satisfactorily explained. The letter was written by Private Leonard Kowalczyk, a young soldier from Milwaukee stationed at Fort Bowie during World War II to guard against potential sabotage of the Southern Pacific Railroad. The letter, addressed to his mother and dated July 19, 1943, contains the passage that has puzzled researchers for decades. "The children are still here. I hear them every night. I don't think they know the war is over." The statement is chronologically impossible. Kowalczyk wrote the letter in July 1943. The war would not end for another 2 years. He could not have known when the war would end, and the children, if they existed, could not have failed to know something that had not yet happened. Some researchers have suggested the passage is metaphorical, a poetic expression of the timelessness Kowalczyk perceived in the landscape. Others have proposed that the letter was misdated, perhaps written in 1945 or later, and incorrectly labeled. The original letter, examined by archivists in 2001, shows no evidence of alteration. The date appears to be authentic. A third interpretation, offered by a historian who studied the letter in 2009, is more unsettling. Kowalczyk wrote what he heard, the historian suggested. The children told him the war was over. They told him something that, from their perspective, had already happened, or would always have happened, or existed outside of time, in a way that made past and future irrelevant. He recorded what they said. He didn't understand it. Neither do we. Kowalczyk survived the war and returned to Milwaukee, where he lived until his death in 1987. He never spoke publicly about his time at Fort Bowie, and his family reported that he rarely mentioned his military service at all. Apache Pass remains accessible today, a quiet stretch of road leading to the ruins of Fort Bowie National Historic Site. The trail to the fort passes the old stage station, the cemetery, and the spring that has drawn travelers to this place for millennia. Interpretive signs explain the history, the Butterfield Mail, the Apache Wars, the soldiers and travelers who passed through this corridor between valleys. The signs do not mention the laughter. Rangers at Fort Bowie do not discuss the phenomenon with visitors, though some will acknowledge it if asked directly. The official position appears to be one of polite agnosticism, neither confirming nor denying reports that have accumulated for more than 150 years. The laughter continues. Hikers who walk the trail alone still hear it occasionally, children playing somewhere among the rocks, their voices bright and clear and impossible to locate. The sound never approaches. It never threatens. It simply exists, a presence as persistent and inexplicable as the desert wind. No children have ever been found in Apache Pass. No graves of children are recorded in the Fort Bowie Cemetery. No historical account explains who they might be or why their laughter echoes through a place that has known so much suffering, so much conflict, so much death. Perhaps they are not ghosts. Perhaps they are not echoes of the past. Perhaps they are something else entirely, a phenomenon that exists outside of history, outside of explanation, outside of the categories we use to make sense of the world. The past that plays, the children who laugh but cannot be seen, the voices that have always been there and may always be there, playing some game that no living person has ever witnessed, in a place where the boundary between what is and what cannot be grows thin enough to hear through. The laughter fades when you search for it. It returns when you stop. And somewhere in Apache Pass, children continue to play, unseen, unexplained, eternal, their voices carrying across the rocks like a memory of something that never happened or a promise of something yet to come.